After 10 years building my family's company, my wife plotted with her father and fired me. My wife's mom sneered, "You were always the weak one." I washed cars to survive until a client said, "Those shares you signed years ago are still yours." I saw the value, $5.7 billion. I nearly dropped the keys. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday night. The kind of rain that makes you feel like the world is washing itself clean or trying to. I remember thinking that as I sat in the back of the Uber, watching the city lights blur into watercolor streaks against the window. I was holding a small velvet box in my coat pocket, my fingers tracing its edges like a rosary. 10 years, a decade of building, sacrificing, bleeding into the foundation of something I thought was ours. The anniversary gift inside that box cost me 3 months of saved lunch money, skipped coffees, and one less birthday present for myself. But Sarah was worth it. Sarah was always worth it. The restaurant was one of those places where the waiters know your name and the wine list costs more than most people's car payments. Her father, Richard Chen, had chosen it. Of course, he had. Richard didn't do anything that wasn't a power move, even family dinners. The Sterling Group's patriarch, the man who'd built a logistics empire from a single warehouse in Queens, didn't believe in casual anything. When he called and said we needed to discuss the company's future, my stomach had tightened, but I'd pushed the feeling down. I'd learned to live with Richard's particular brand of tension. It was the price of admission to this family. I walked through those heavy glass doors at exactly 7:30. Punctuality was one of Richard's unspoken tests, and I'd learned years ago never to fail it. They were already seated. The table was round, intimate in theory, a war room in practice. Richard at the head, because even round tables have heads when Richard Chen sits down. Sarah to his right, her mother Linda to his left. And there, across from my empty chair, was David. Sarah's brother, the golden child, the one who'd spent the last decade traveling, finding himself, attending art galleries in Prague and yoga retreats in Bali while I'd been in windowless offices until 3 o'clock in the morning, rebuilding their father's supply chain infrastructure from the ground up. "You're here," Sarah said. Not hello, not I missed you, just an observation, flat as week-old champagne. I kissed her cheek. She smelled like that perfume I'd bought her last Christmas. The one she'd said made her feel powerful. Her skin was cold. "Traffic was hell," I said, sliding into my seat. I smiled at Richard, nodded at Linda, lifted a hand toward David. "Good to see everyone." Linda's eyes flicked over me like I was a wine stain on expensive upholstery. She'd never hidden her disappointment that her daughter had married me. The scholarship kid, the state school graduate, the boy from nowhere with nothing but a finance degree and what she called unrealistic optimism. She'd wanted Sarah to marry into the Goldman family or the Wangs or literally anyone whose last name came with a trust fund and a country club membership. "You look tired," Linda said. It sounded like an accusation. "He's been working," Sarah said. But there was something strange in her voice, something I couldn't place. "Haven't you, James?" "ADR weeks have that effect," I said lightly. I was trying to keep things pleasant. I was trying to keep things pleasant with them. Richard cleared his throat. That particular sound that meant we were moving to business. A waiter materialized with water disappeared. The man knew better than to interrupt Richard Chen mid-thought. "James," he began. And I noticed he didn't use my last name. He never did. I'd been married to his daughter for a decade, and I was still just James, while David was David Chen, announced with the full weight of dynasty behind it. "We've asked you here tonight because there are some significant changes coming to the Sterling Group." My heart kicked against my ribs. Changes. In Richard's vocabulary, that word carried the weight of tectonic plates shifting. "I'm listening." "Ah," I said. Sarah's hand moved to the table, her fingers drumming once, twice. A nervous habit I'd memorized years ago, back when we used to stay up late in our tiny apartment, dreaming about the future. Back when her nervous habits meant she was excited, not whatever this was. "The company is entering a new phase," Richard continued. His voice was measured, the tone he used in boardrooms when he was about to fire someone, but wanted to make it sound like an opportunity. "We're restructuring our leadership team, bringing in new vision, new energy." "That's great," I said, and I meant it. The Sterling Group had been my life's work for the past decade. I'd taken Richard's company, profitable, but stuck in the 20th century, and dragged it into the modern era. I'd implemented the automation systems that cut operational costs by 37%. I'd personally negotiated the contracts with the Chinese manufacturers that opened up the Asian market. I'd been in Shanghai, in Mumbai, in Sao Paulo, missing anniversaries and birthdays and quiet Sunday mornings. All because I believed in what we were building, what I was building for us, for Sarah, for the family I'd married into and desperately wanted to belong to. David is coming on as Chief Operations Officer, Richard said. The room tilted slightly. Just slightly. David smiled at me. It was the kind of smile where a cat gives a mouse before the paw comes down. Congratulations, I heard myself say. My voice sounded normal. That was good. I could do this. David was family. Family helped family. That's fantastic, David. You'll be great. And we're making some other changes, Richard continued. And now there was something in his voice that made my skin go cold despite the restaurant's warmth. We're simplifying our executive structure. Consolidating roles, making things more efficient. Sarah's hand stopped drumming. The silence was louder than thunder. James, Richard said. And I knew in that moment before the words came out of his mouth, I knew. We're letting you go effective immediately. The world didn't explode. The ceiling didn't fall. The other diners kept eating, kept laughing, kept living their lives while mine was being dismantled with surgical precision at table 7. I'm sorry, I said because my brain couldn't process what I just heard. What? We're terminating your position, Linda said, and there was something almost gleeful in her voice. We appreciate your contributions, of course, but the company is moving in a different direction. I looked at Sarah, my wife, my partner, the woman I'd built everything for. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah, I said just her name. A question, a plea, a decade of mornings and midnights compressed into 2 syllables. It's for the best, she said quietly. We need fresh perspectives. Fresh perspectives. I'd given them the Asian market. I'd given them the automation infrastructure. I'd given them 10 years of my life. And they needed fresh perspectives. I don't understand, I said. And I hated how small my voice sounded. The Q4 numbers were record-breaking. The Melbourne contract alone. Well, this isn't about performance, Richard interrupted. This is about vision, about leadership, about family. And there it was, the word that had always been a door I couldn't quite walk through. Family. I am family, I said. I married your daughter. I've worked. You married into the family, Linda corrected, her voice sharp as broken glass. There's a difference. You were always an employee, James. A very dedicated employee, certainly. But an employee nonetheless. David leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. He hadn't said a word, but his presence was loud as sirens. This had been planned carefully, meticulously. They'd rehearsed this. There will be a severance package, Richard said, sliding an envelope across the table. It sat there between the salt and pepper shakers. Everything I'd built reduced to paper and numbers. It's generous, more than generous. 3 months' salary, benefits extended for 6 months. We're not monsters, James. I stared at the envelope. I didn't touch it. And my projects. I asked the Singapore expansion, the AI logistics integration, those are company projects, Sarah said. And now she did look at me and her eyes were ice. You don't own them. You never did. Something in my chest cracked. Not my heart. That would come later. This was something deeper. The foundation of who I thought I was, who I thought we were, splitting down the middle. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Silence. Sarah, I said. How long? 6 months, she said quietly. We've been discussing it for 6 months. 6 months. While I was in Seoul finalizing the warehouse contracts. While I was pulling all-nighters to make sure the quarterly earnings would make them proud. While I was shopping for an anniversary gift I couldn't afford, she'd been in her father's office planning my execution. I loved you, I said. Past tense. The words came out before I could stop them. Linda laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was like champagne glasses shattering on marble. Love, she said, shaking her head. You were always so dramatic, James. So emotional. That was your problem. You know, in business, emotion is weakness. Richard saw potential in you once, but potential isn't enough. You never had the killer instinct, the ruthlessness. You were always the weak one. The weak one. I stood up, the chair scraped against the floor, too loud in the careful quiet of the restaurant. I need some air, I said. Take the envelope, Richard said. You'll want to review the terms. Your lawyer will. I don't have a lawyer, I said. I was backing away from the table now, my hands shaking. I never needed one. I trusted you. I trusted all of you. Sarah's face flickered with something. Guilt. Regret. But it was gone so fast I might have imagined it. James, she started. Don't, I said. Just don't. I walked out of that restaurant into the rain. And I remember thinking that at least the weather matched the moment. At least the universe had that much sense of drama. I walked for blocks, my phone buzzing in my pocket, Texts from Sarah probably, or maybe HR with my final paperwork, and I didn't look at any of them. I ended up on a bench in Bryant Park, rain soaking through my coat, the velvet box still in my pocket. I took it out, opened it, the necklace and its intertwined with mine. The design I'd spent hours working on with the jeweler caught the streetlight and glittered like a promise that no one intended to keep. I sat there until the rain stopped, until the city around me went quiet, until the cold seeped so deep into my bones I couldn't feel my fingers. And then I went home to the apartment I could no longer afford in the building where the doorman already knew I didn't belong there anymore. You can see these things in people's eyes the exact moment you stop being someone who matters. And I started packing. 3 days later, I was sleeping on my college roommate Marcus's couch in Queens, staring at the ceiling at 4 a.m, wondering how you rebuild a life when someone's taken every single brick you used to build it. The answer I would learn was simple. You start with water and soap in someone else's car. You start at the bottom again. You start humble and you wait for the universe to remember that it owes you a receipt. The couch smelled like old pizza and broken dreams. Marcus' apartment was a studio in Atoria, the kind of place where the radiator clanged like a prisoner trying to escape and the neighbors' arguments bled through walls thin as promises. I'd lie there at night staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like maps to countries I'd never visit and try to remember who I used to be. The first week I didn't leave the couch except to use the bathroom. Marcus would come home from his job at the tech startup, some app that promised to revolutionize grocery shopping or dating or both. I could never keep track. And he'd look at me with this mixture of pity and concern that made me want to disappear into the cushions. You got to eat, man, he'd say, leaving takeout containers on the coffee table. Thai food, Chinese, pizza. Everything tasted like cardboard. Sarah called 17 times the first 3 days. I know because I counted. I didn't answer. By day 4, the call stopped. By day 7, divorce papers arrived via courier. She'd had her lawyer, because of course she had a lawyer. Probably had one waiting in the wings the whole 6 months they'd been planning my professional murder. Draw up everything. The apartment was hers. The car was hers. The life insurance policy we'd taken out together, the joint accounts, the timeshare in Vermont we'd bought when we still believed in shared futures. All of it hers. I signed everything. I didn't have the strength to fight. And even if I did, what was I fighting for? A marriage that had been a business arrangement all along? A wife who could sit across from me at dinner and watch her father execute me without so much as a flinch. You're entitled to half, Marcus said when he saw the papers. Community property. This is New York, man. You don't have to. I don't want anything from them, I said. And I meant it. Taking her money, fighting for the apartment, dragging this out in court. That would mean I still cared. That would mean they still had power over me. I wanted to be free of them completely. Even if freedom looked like a couch in Queens and a bank account with $473 in it. The severance check came a week later. $75,000. 3 months' salary. 10 years of my life reduced to a number that wouldn't even cover a down payment in the city I'd helped them conquer. I deposited the check and started looking for work. That's when I learned what it meant to be blacklisted. The finance world is smaller than you think. Tighter. One bad word from the right person or the wrong person depending on your perspective and doors close before you even know they're there. I sent out 42 applications in 2 weeks. I got 3 responses. 2 were automated rejections. One was an interview for a junior analyst position, junior after I'd been COO, that ended with the hiring manager literally taking a phone call mid-con conversation and then telling me they decided to go in a different direction. I saw the name on his phone screen before he turned it away. Richard Chen. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about firing me. This was about erasing me. Marcus tried to help. He had connections. He said, friends in tech who were always looking for people with operations experience. But every lead went cold. Every conversation started promising and ended with, we'll be in touch. In the silence that meant they wouldn't. I lasted 6 weeks on that couch before I knew I had to do something, anything, or I'd disappear completely. The severance was bleeding out. Rent to Marcus, even though he'd said I didn't have to pay. Student loan payments I'd deferred but couldn't defer forever. The divorce lawyer I'd finally hired when I realized Sarah's team was trying to make me liable for debts I didn't even know existed. That's when I saw the ad on Craigslist. Car wash attendant needed. Flexible hours cash daily. I stared at that posting for an hour before I clicked. I had an MBA from Columbia. I'd negotiated 8-figure contracts. I'd stood in boardrooms in Singapore and Sydney and Sao Paulo and made decisions that affected thousands of employees millions of dollars. And now I was applying to wash cars. Pride is a strange thing. You don't know how much of it you have until circumstances take a knife to it and start carving. I'd always thought of myself as humble, as someone who'd come from nothing and remembered where he'd started. But sitting there filling out that application, I realized I'd bought into their version of success. I'd let them make me believe that my worth was tied to my title, my salary, the weight of my business card. The car wash was in Midtown, tucked between a parking garage and a dry cleaner that always smelled like chemicals and lost time. The owner was a guy named Tommy, 60-some with hands like leather, and a laugh that sounded like gravel in a blender. He looked at my application. I'd left off the MBA, the COO title, everything that would make him question why I was there, and hired me on the spot. "You start tomorrow," he said. 6 a.m. Don't be late. I wasn't. The work was exactly what you'd imagine. Spray down the cars, soap them up, rinse, dry, move to the next one, repeat. The water was cold, even in September. And by the end of the first day, my hands were raw and my back was screaming. I made $87 in tips. It was the most honest money I'd earned in years. The other guys who worked there were good people, real people. Carlos was trying to save for his daughter's quinceañera. Miguel was sending money back to family in Ecuador. Jay was a musician who worked mornings so he could play clubs at night. They didn't ask about my past. Didn't care where I'd come from. I was just James, the new guy who didn't complain and showed up on time. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I fell into a rhythm. Wake up at 5, work until 2. Go back to Marcus's apartment. Apply to jobs I'd never hear back from. Sleep, repeat. The weeks blurred together, each one the same as the last, until I couldn't remember if it had been 2 months or 3 or 6. That's when Linda Chen found me. It was a Tuesday, unseasonably cold for October. I was driving off a black Mercedes, some hedge fund guy who never tipped, when a town car pulled up. The kind of car Richard used to send for me back when I mattered. Back when I was still pretending I was part of the family. The window rolled down and there she was, Linda, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than I made in a month, her face arranged in an expression of carefully practiced disgust. "Well," she said, "this is appropriate." I kept drying the Mercedes. My hands were shaking, but I kept moving the cloth in small circles, focusing on the motion, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. "I heard rumors you were working here," she continued. I didn't believe them. I thought even you would have more dignity than this, but I suppose I overestimated you. Again, Carlos was watching from the other side of the lot. I could feel his eyes on me, his protective instincts kicking in, but I shook my head slightly. This wasn't his fight. "What do you want, Linda?" I asked quietly. "Want?" She laughed. "From you? Nothing. You have nothing I want. You never did. I'm simply here to pick up my car from the garage next door. And imagine my surprise when I saw you. The great James Martinez, the boy genius who was going to revolutionize our company. Look at you now." She leaned forward and even though I couldn't see her size behind those sunglasses, I could feel the contempt radiating off her like heat from asphalt. "You were always the weak one, James," she said. And her voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it worse. "We gave you everything, a position, a salary, a place in our family, and you squandered it. You weren't strong enough. You weren't smart enough. You certainly weren't ruthless enough. Men like Richard build empires. Men like David inherit them. Men like you." She gestured around the car wash. "Men like you wash our cars." Something in me cracked. Not broke. I was too tired to break anymore. Just cracked. A hairline fracture in whatever was left of my pride. "Is that all?" I asked. She smiled. "Yes, that's all. I just wanted to see it for myself. Wanted to confirm that we made the right decision. And looking at you now, standing there in your little uniform with your little spray bottle, I can say with absolute certainty, we did." The town car window rolled up. She drove away. I stood there for a long time, water dripping from the hose in my hand, forming a puddle at my feet. "Hey, man," Carlos said, walking over. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. I went home that night and sat in the dark in Marcus's apartment and felt something inside me that I hadn't felt in months. Not sadness, not anger, something colder, clearer, determination. They thought they destroyed me. They thought reducing me to this, to manual labor, to poverty, to public humiliation would break me permanently. They thought I'd slink away and disappear and let them write the story of who I was and what I'd meant. They were wrong. I didn't know how yet. Didn't know what I'd do or how I'd do it. But sitting there in the dark, my hands still smelling like car soap and defeat, I made myself a promise. I would rise again. Not for revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional, the kind of thing that Linda was right to say I was too weak for. No, I would rise for something better. For proof. Proof that I was never the weak one. Proof that they'd made the mistake of their lives. And when I had that proof, when I held it in my hands like evidence in a trial they didn't know they were facing, I would show them exactly what it cost to underestimate someone who had nothing left to lose. I just had to survive long enough to find it. Winter came early that year, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. By November, I'd been at the car wash for 3 months, and my body had adapted in ways I never expected. My hands were calloused, immune to the cold water. My back had stopped screaming. I could look at a car and know exactly how long it would take to clean, which techniques worked best on which makes and models. I'd become an expert in something I never wanted to be an expert in. The tips were better now. I'd learned the psychology of it, the smile at the right moment, the extra attention to the wheels, the way to make small talk without being intrusive. Some regulars asked for me by name. It was a strange kind of pride being good at something so simple, so honest. Marcus had stopped asking when I was going to find real work. I think he'd realized somewhere around the second month that this was real work. Maybe the most real work I'd ever done. No politics, no backstabbing, no pretending, just water and soap and elbow grease and the quiet satisfaction of something clean that wasn't clean before. But at night, alone on that couch, I still felt the weight of what I'd lost. Not the money, not the title. Those things seemed increasingly meaningless with distance. What haunted me was the belief. The naive, stupid belief that hard work mattered, that loyalty mattered, that if you gave everything to people you loved, they'd see your worth. I'd been such a fool. It was a Wednesday morning, gray and threatening snow, when the black Audi pulled up. Q7, maybe 2 years old, immaculate, except for the road salt, the kind of car that said money without screaming it. I grabbed my spray bottle and bucket and walked over. The driver's window rolled down and a man in his 60s looked out at me. Silver hair, expensive glasses, the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to be impressed by them. He was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. Full service? I asked. He studied me for a long moment. Too long. It made the back of my neck prickle. James Martinez, he said. My stomach dropped. Nobody here knew my last name. I've been careful about that. Paranoid even. The other guys called me Jimmy or Jay or just hey you. Do I know you? I asked carefully. Robert Kleinfeld, he said, extending his hand through the window. We met once about 7 years ago. Singapore. You were negotiating the warehouse contracts for the Sterling Group. The world tilted slightly. Singapore. I remembered that trip. 3 weeks of brutal meetings, time zones that destroyed my sleep schedule. Humidity that made me feel like I was breathing water. I'd been younger then, hungry, still believing that proving myself would be enough. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, assessing. I remember, I said. You were representing the Tenku Interests real estate portfolio. You have a good memory, he said, looking pleased. I'm impressed you remember. It was a brief meeting. You were there with Richard Chen and his team. But I remember thinking, this kid, you couldn't have been 30 then. This kid actually understands what he's talking about. While the others were posturing, you were asking real questions. Smart questions. I didn't know what to say to that. Compliments felt like traps. Now Era asked and there was no judgment in the question. Just genuine curiosity. Working my bond, I said simply. I heard rumors, he said. The finance world talks. I heard you were let go from Sterling. Heard it was sudden. Heard. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I heard it wasn't about performance. It wasn't, I said. He nodded slowly. Family business. Something like that. Those are the worst kind, he said. I've seen it 100 times. Talented people chewed up because they weren't born with the right last name. It's wasteful, cruel, often. I started spraying down his car, needing something to do with my hands. He didn't seem to mind the conversation continuing while I worked. You built a lot of what made Sterling successful in Asia, he continued. The logistics infrastructure, the vendor relationships, the automation systems. I kept tabs on it. I like to know who the real players are, not just the names on the letterhead. You did good work, Martinez. Really good work. Thank you, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth. I wasn't used to professional recognition anymore. I was used to good job from Tommy when I detailed a particularly difficult car or fist bumps from Carlos when we finished a busy rush. What are your plans? Kleinfeld asked. Plans? I almost laughed. Right now, get through today. Maybe tomorrow. That's it. I looked at him directly. Mr. Kleinfeld, I appreciate whatever this is. I do. But if you're here to offer me some kind of pity job, or if you want me to feel bad about myself, or if this is I'm here because I need my car washed," he interrupted. "And because I don't believe in coincidences, when I recognized you standing here washing cars, I thought, either this man has given up completely or he's doing what he needs to do to survive, and men who survive are interesting to me." I didn't respond. I kept working, moving to the wheel, scrubbing away the salt and grime. "Do you remember the paperwork you signed when you started at Sterling?" he asked suddenly. The question was so random it made me stop. "The employment contract?" I asked. "Before that, the very beginning when Richard first brought you on board." I thought back. It felt like another lifetime. I'd been 26, fresh out of Columbia, drowning in student debt, and desperate to prove myself. Richard had made me an offer, decent salary, equity incentive, the promise of building something meaningful. "There was a stock agreement," I said slowly. "Minor equity stake 0%. It was symbolic more than anything. Richard said it was to make me feel invested in the company's success." Kleinfeld smiled. 3% to be exact. "I know because I reviewed Sterling's corporate structure last year when they were exploring some joint ventures with one of my holdings. That agreement, did you ever buy out? Did you ever sign anything terminating that equity position?" I tried to remember 10 years of paperwork, hundreds of documents signed in hundreds of offices. The severance agreement had been thorough, covering everything from intellectual property to non-compete clauses to confidentiality. "But equity? I don't think so." I said they never mentioned it. "The severance papers didn't check." Kleinfeld said check very carefully because if that equity stake still exists and if they didn't properly terminate it as part of your severance, you might own more of that company than you think. My hands had stopped moving. The spray bottle hung loose at my side. "Why would that matter?" I asked. 3% of Sterling is nothing. Even with the growth, that's 3% of Sterling Group before the Asian expansion, he corrected. Before the automation implementation, before the 3 acquisitions they have completed in the last 8 months, before the Melbourne deal you negotiated closed and added $2 billion in valuation. The number hung in the air between us like smoke. "They've been growing," he continued, aggressively. "The company you helped build is worth exponentially more than it was when you signed that agreement. And if that equity still exists, if they forgot about it or assumed you'd never check or simply didn't bother to clean it up," he paused. "Well, let's just say 3% of $19 billion is more than nothing." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The math was trying to happen in my brain, but kept sliding away like water on wax paint. 19 billion, I repeated. As of their last valuation round, yes, they're positioning for an IPO next year. The company is worth more than Richard probably dreamed when he started it. 3% of $19 billion. I'd washed enough cars in the past 3 months to know basic arithmetic. That was 57 million, I said quietly. If the equity stake still exists, Kleinfeld cautioned. That's a big if. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a man who's seen enough corporate divorces to know that sometimes in the rush to get rid of someone, companies make mistakes. They forget to cross T's. Do E's, especially family companies that aren't used to playing by institutional rules. He handed me a business card through the window. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, the kind of card that meant serious money. I have a lawyer, he said. Best corporate attorney in New York. Absolutely vicious. Completely ethical, and she loves cases like this. Cases where the little guy might have been screwed. If you want, I can make an introduction. No obligation. Just look into it. Pull your files. Check what you signed, what you didn't sign. I took the card with numb fingers. Why are you helping me? I asked. He smiled, but there was something hard in it. Because I've built 3 companies from nothing. Martinez, I know what it takes. I know the difference between someone who's riding coattails and someone who's actually pulling the sled. And I watched Richard Chen take all the credit for work you did. I watched him in meetings talking about our strategy and our vision when I knew damn well whose strategy it really was. He started his engine. Also, he added, I really hate bullies, and family bullies are the worst kind. They make you think you're supposed to take it. That loyalty means letting them destroy you. I stood there holding his business card as he drove away. My Audi gleaming and perfect. The card said Patricia Wong, Corporate Law, Kleinfeld and Associates. Carlos came over whistling low. That guy tipped you $100. He said, what did you do? Wash his car with your tongue? I looked down. There was a folded bill in my bucket. Benjamin Franklin staring up at me. He was just an old client, I said. But that night, back at Marcus's apartment, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out the box I'd shoved under the couch 3 months ago, the box with all my Sterling documents, the things I couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bear to throw away either. I dug through severance agreements, NDAs, intellectual property transfers. Page after patch of legal language, all of it designed to separate me from the company I'd built. But nowhere, and I checked 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, nowhere was there any mention of equity termination. No buyout clause, no forfeit agreement, nothing. The original stock certificate was there, yellowed and forgotten at the bottom of the box. 3% of the Sterling Group issued to James Martinez, dated January 15, 10 years ago. I held it up to the light like it might disappear if I looked away. $57 million. If it was real, if it was valid, if they'd made the mistake I suddenly, desperately hoped they'd made. I pulled out my phone and stared at Patricia Wong's number for a long time before I finally started typing. My name is James Martinez. Robert Kleinfeld gave me your card. I need to know if I still own part of the company that destroyed my life. I hit send before I could second guess it myself. The response came back in less than 2 minutes. Come see me tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring everything. Patricia Wong's office was in Midtown 53rd floor of a building where even the elevator felt like it was judging you. I stood in the lobby at 8:45 wearing the only suit I still own, the one I'd worn to my last day at Sterling, now slightly too big because I'd lost weight washing cars and eating ramen. My shoes were scuffed. My tie was from JCPenney. I looked like exactly what I was. A man who used to belong in places like this and no longer did. The receptionist was polite in that razor-sharp way expensive firms teach their staff. Smile with your mouth. Assess with your eyes. Make people know they're being measured. Mr. Martinez, she said, Miss Wong is expecting you. Conference room 3. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The kind of view that reminded you how small you were and how big the game was. Patricia Wong was already there, standing at the window with her back to me, talking on her phone in rapid Cantonese. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5 feet 2 inches, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than I'd made in the last month. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and when she turned around her eyes were the sharpest thing I'd ever seen. I'll call you back, she said into the phones, then to me. Sit. I sat. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Robert says you might have an equity stake in a company that fired you. The Sterling Group, Logistics, and Supply Chain, Richard Chen's baby. That correct? Yes, I said. And you brought documentation. I slid the folder across the table. Everything I'd found last night, the original stock certificate, the employment contract, the severance agreement, my entire professional life reduced to 37 pages. She put on reading glasses and started going through it with the focus of a surgeon examining x-rays. She didn't speak for 10 minutes, just read, occasionally making notes on a legal pad with a fountain pen that looked like it cost more than my rent. Finally, she looked up. This is interesting, she said. Interesting good or interesting bad? Interesting like watching a man fall off a building in slow motion. You don't know if he's going to hit the ground or if there's a miracle waiting. She tapped the stock certificate. This is legitimate. Properly executed. Filed with the New York Secretary of State. 3% equity stake issued January 15, 15 years ago. No expiration, no buyback clause, no forfeit language. It's clean. My heart was hammering. And the severance agreement doesn't mention it, not once. They covered intellectual property, non-compete, confidentiality, trade secrets, future employment, social media behavior. They were very thorough about everything except the one thing that actually matters. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator that had just spotted wounded prey. They forgot about your equity. How is that possible? I asked. They had lawyers, good lawyers. This is a billion-dollar company. Family companies make family company mistakes, she said. They operate on assumptions, relationships, informal agreements. Richard Chen probably thought of that equity stake as a gesture, something symbolic he gave you when you were young and grateful. He probably forgot it existed. Or he assumed it was so small it didn't matter. Or, and this is my personal theory, he was so focused on humiliating you, on making you feel worthless, that he didn't think you'd ever have the nerve to check. She leaned forward. Do you know what Sterling Group's current valuation is? Kleinfeld said 19 billion. Close. As of their last funding round in September, they're valued at 18.7 billion. They're preparing for an IPO next spring. The preliminary prospectus is public record. I pulled it this morning. They're projecting a 24 billion IPO valuation. Conservative estimates say the stock will double in the first year. The numbers were too big. They kept sliding around in my head, refusing to become real. 3% of $18.7 billion, I said slowly. Is 56.1 million? She finished. Current value. If they IPO at 24 billion and you retain your shares, you're looking at 72 million. If the stock performs the way analysts predict, you could be looking at 150 million within 3 years. The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table. But there's a problem, she continued. Actually, several problems. First, that equity is currently illiquid. You can't just cash it out. It's shares in a private company. Second, if they discover you're claiming this stake, they will fight hard. They'll argue that it was invalidated by your termination, that there was a verbal agreement, that you waived it somehow. They'll drown you in motions and depositions and legal fees until you give up. So, I can't win, I said. My voice sounded hollow. I didn't say that. Her smile widened. I said they'll fight, but here's what they don't know yet. You have time on your side. That IPO prospectus, it has to disclose all shareholders with stakes above 1%. Your name isn't on it, which means either they genuinely forgot you exist or they're committing securities fraud by omitting a material shareholder. Either way, the SEC would be very interested. She pulled out a thick document and slid it across the table. This is what we call leverage, Mr. Martinez. If we threaten to go to the SEC before the IPO, Richard Chen has 3 choices. 1. Fight us and delay the IPO while they sort out the shareholder dispute, which will cost them millions and make investors nervous. 2. Buy you out immediately at current valuation to make you go away quietly. 3. Let you keep the shares and add you to the prospectus, which means admitting they screwed up and having you as a permanent shareholder in their family company. Which option do you think they'll choose? I asked. Depends on how much pride Richard has versus how much he wants that IPO money. But my guess, they'll try to buy you out, offer you 30 million, 40 million, something that sounds huge to you, but is a discount to them. They'll make it seem generous. They'll make you feel like you're getting more than you deserve. What do you think I should do? She sat back, studying me. That depends on what you want. Is this about money? Because if it is, take the buyout. $30 million is more than most people see in a lifetime. Walk away. Rebuild your life. Never think about them again. And if it's not about money, then you hold it, you refuse the buyout. You demand your seat at the table. You make them add you to the prospectus. You become a shareholder they can't erase. You sit in their annual meetings. You vote on their decisions. You remind them every single day that they didn't destroy you, that they couldn't. Her eyes were gleaming now. She was enjoying this. That's what you want, isn't it? She said, not the money, the proof. You want to prove they were wrong about you. I thought about Linda's face through that town car window. You were always the weak one. I thought about Sarah's ice-cold eyes across that restaurant table. I thought about Richard's dismissive tone, David's smug smile, the 6 months they'd spent planning my eraser while I worked myself to exhaustion, believing I was building our future. Yes, I said quietly. I want them to know they were wrong. Patricia nodded slowly. Then here's what we do. We file a formal claim with the company notification that you're asserting your shareholder rights. We give them 30 days to respond. They'll panic, call their lawyers, scramble to figure out how this happened. Then they'll come to us with offers. Big offers. Scary big offers designed to make you shut up and disappear. And I say no. You say no. We negotiate only for one thing. Recognition as a legitimate shareholder with full voting rights. We don't ask for more equity. Don't ask for damages. Don't make this about money. We make it about principle, about what's legally, indisputably yours. They'll hate that, I said. They'll despise it. Richard Chen doesn't lose. He especially doesn't lose to people he's already defeated. It'll drive him insane. She smiled, which is frankly the best part. What's this going to cost me? I asked. I have about 60,000 left for my severance. I can't afford. Robert's retainer covers the initial filing and negotiation, she interrupted. He's already paid me. Consider it an investment. He likes you. More importantly, he hates your in-laws. The Chen screwed him on a deal about 5 years ago. He's been waiting for an opportunity to return the favor. I stared at her. So, this is revenge. This is business. The fact that it also happens to be incredibly satisfying revenge is just a bonus. She gathered up the documents. I need you to sign some papers. Power of attorney, legal representation agreement, a few other things. And I need you to prepare yourself for what? For them to come at you with everything they have. They'll investigate you, dig up dirt, try to find leverage. They'll make offers that sound like miracles. They'll have Sarah call you. Probably use your history against you. They'll play on your guilt, your feelings, your desire to not be the bad guy. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping. Can you handle that? Can you look your ex-wife in the eye and tell her no? Can you sit across from your former father-in-law and not back down? Because if you can't, we should walk away right now, take what we can get, and call it a win. I thought about the couch in Marcus's apartment, the cold water at the car wash, the sound of Linda's laughter when she called me weak, the 3 months of silence from every person I'd thought was a friend who disappeared the moment I was no longer useful. I can handle it, I said. Patricia smiled. Good, because honestly, this is the most fun I have had in years. Family companies think they're untouchable. They think loyalty and tradition matter more than contracts and law. I love proving them wrong. She stood up, extended her hand. Welcome to the fight of your life, Mr. Martinez. Try not to let them see you sweat. I shook her hand. Her grip was iron. One more thing, she said as I was leaving. Don't tell anyone about this. Not your roommate, not your coworkers, not anyone. When we file, it needs to be a surprise. The element of shock is part of our leverage. How long until we file? I'll have everything ready by Friday. We'll serve them next Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, your life is going to get very interesting. I walked out of that office building into the November cold. And for the first time in months, I felt something besides numbness. I felt dangerous. I went to the car wash that afternoon and worked my shift. Sprayed down Benzes and Beamers and Teslas. Smiled at customers, collected tips. Carlos asked if I was okay. I must have looked different somehow. Must have been carrying myself differently. Yeah, I said. I'm good. That night on Marcus's couch, I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos I'd avoided for months. Pictures of Sarah and me, our wedding day, vacations, quiet Sunday mornings. All those moments I thought were real. I deleted every single one. Not out of anger, out of clarity. She was the past. The Kins were the past. What came next was the future. And the future, I was beginning to realize, belonged to people who refused to stay down. The weekend before Patricia filed the claim felt like waiting for an execution. Mine or theirs, I wasn't sure yet. I worked my shifts at the car wash, went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere, playing out scenarios, imagining Richard's face when he received the notification, wondering if Sarah would call, what she'd say, whether any part of her would feel guilty. Marcus noticed Saturday night, he ordered Thai food and sat down across from me with that look, the one that said we were going to talk whether I wanted to or not. What's going on with you? He asked. You've been weird all week. More weird than usual. Weird. Nothing. I said, bullshit. I've known you since freshman year. I know your poker face. You don't have one. He pointed his chopsticks at me. Is this about Sarah? Did she contact you? No, it's not about Sarah. Then what? I wanted to tell him. Marcus had given me his couch, his food, his patience. He'd watched me fall apart and hadn't judged me for it. But Patricia's warning echoed. Don't tell anyone. The element of surprise is our leverage. I might have some legal stuff happening. I said carefully with Sterling about my severance. Legal stuff good or legal stuff bad? Potentially very good, but I can't talk about it yet. He studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. Okay. But if you need anything, money, backup, someone to punch Richard Chen in the face, I'm here. I smiled despite myself. I'll keep that in mind. Monday morning came too fast and too slow. I called in sick to the car wash, first time in 3 months, and spent the hours between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. pacing Marcus' apartment, checking my phone every 30 seconds, even though Patricia said she wouldn't contact me until after the papers were served. At 9:47 a.m., my phone rang. Patricia's number. It's done, she said. Courier delivered the shareholder notification and legal claim to Sterling Group's corporate headquarters at 9:30. They'll be reading it right about now. My mouth was dry. What happens next? We wait. They'll need time to verify the claim. Panic. Call their employers. I'd expect to hear something by end of business today. Maybe tomorrow if they're being strategic. And if they don't respond, they'll respond. Trust me, this isn't something they can ignore. She was right. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, heart hammering. The voicemail notification popped up. I played it on speaker. James, this is David Chen. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fury underneath. We need to talk. Call me back immediately. This is absurd. Whatever game you're playing, it needs to stop. Call me. I forwarded the voicemail to Patricia without responding. At 3:45 p.m., another call. Richard Chen, this time I didn't answer. His voicemail was shorter, colder. James, my lawyers are reviewing your claim. This is highly inappropriate. We treated you fairly, more than fairly. I expect to hear from you or your counsel by end of business tomorrow. At 5:30 p.m., the call I'd been dreading, Sarah. I stared at her name on my screen for all 6 rings before it went to voicemail. Her voice when it came through sounded tired, defeated, almost human. James, it's me. I know you probably don't want to talk to me. I understand that, but please can you call me back? This thing with the shares, we need to discuss it. My father is losing his mind. David is threatening to sue you into oblivion. It's chaos here. A pause. Please just call me. Let's figure this out like adults. Like adults. Like we hadn't been adults when they planned my firing over 6 months. Like we hadn't been adults when they humiliated me at that restaurant. Like we hadn't been adults when she sent divorce papers while I was sleeping on a couch in Queens. I deleted the voicemail. Patricia called at 6. I've received 3 calls from Sterling's legal team. They want to meet tomorrow if possible. They're offering to fly me to their offices. What did you say? I said we'd meet at my office Thursday at 2 p.m. and they could bring whoever they wanted. They didn't like it, but they agreed. They're scared, James. Really scared. Why Thursday? Why not tomorrow? Because desperation is a curve. Tomorrow they'd be angry. By Thursday, they'll be terrified. The IPO deadline is real. Every day this drags on costs them leverage with investors. We want them afraid, not angry. Tuesday was quieter. Just 2 calls. One from a number I didn't recognize, probably another Sterling lawyer, one from David again. I ignored both. I went back to the car wash. Needed the simple physics of water and soap and shine. Tommy pulled me aside during lunch break. You okay, Jimmy? You seem distracted. Just some personal stuff, I said. It'll pass. You need time off? I shook my head. Work helps. Keeps me focused. He nodded satisfied. Tommy was good that way. He cared, but he didn't pry. Wednesday, the call stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I kept checking my phone, wondering if I'd somehow missed something crucial. If they'd found a way around the claim, if this was all going to evaporate like every other hope I'd had in the last 6 months. Patricia texted at noon. Radio silence is normal. They're strategizing, preparing their offer. See you tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on Marcus' couch and watched shadows move across the ceiling and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. They'd find a loophole. They'd prove the equity was invalid. They'd offer me money and I'd be weak enough to take it because $30 million was still $30 million. And who was I kidding? I wasn't strong enough for this fight. You were always the weak one. I got up at 4 a.m. and went for a walk. The city was quiet. That strange pre-dawn hush when even New York takes a breath. I ended up at the East River watching the water catch the first hints of sunrise. And I made myself remember. I remembered being 26, sitting in Richard's office, him telling me I had potential, telling me I could be part of something bigger than myself. I remembered believing him. I remembered 10 years of believing him. I remembered the night I proposed to Sarah. How she'd cried and said yes and told me she couldn't imagine life without me. How we'd stayed up until dawn making plans, dreaming dreams that felt so solid I could have built a house from them. I remembered the first major deal I'd closed for Sterling, the Shanghai distribution center. How I'd called Richard from the airport, exhausted and triumphant, and he'd said, "I knew you could do it, son." Son. The word I'd wanted to hear from my own father who died when I was 12 and never saw me become anything. I remembered all of it. Let myself feel the weight of it. And then I let it go. Not with anger, not with forgiveness either. Just release. Like opening your hand and watching something fall that you'd been holding too tight for too long. They didn't get to define me anymore. Not who I was, not who I'd been, not who I'd become. I went back to the apartment, showered, put on my JCPenney suit, and headed to Patricia's office. She was already in the conference room when I arrived at 1:30 reviewing documents with 2 associates I hadn't met before. "James," she said, looking up. "Good. We're almost ready. They'll be here at 2. It's going to be Richard, David, their chief counsel, and probably one of their outside attorneys. Big guns. They want to intimidate. Will it work?" She smiled. "On them or on you?" At precisely 2 p.m., the receptionist showed them in. I'd steeled myself for this moment, practiced staying calm, but nothing quite prepared me for seeing them again. Richard in his 1000 suit, still carrying himself like a man who'd never heard the word no. David beside him, all entitled swagger and family name. Their lawyers, 2 men in matching navy suits who looked like they'd been grown in the same corporate lab. And then behind them, Sarah. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was a legal meeting, a business negotiation. But there she was, wearing that blue dress I'd always loved, her eyes finding mine across the table and holding them. "James," Richard said, not sitting. "This is unnecessary." "Mr. Chen," Patricia interrupted smoothly. "Please sit. We have a lot to discuss." They sat. The lawyers immediately started pulling out documents, tablet computers, a whole arsenal of legal weaponry. Patricia just smiled and folded her hands on the table. "I'll make this simple," Richard said, his voice tight. "That equity agreement was a courtesy, a gesture. It was never meant to be this. You left the company. You took a generous severance. This claim is frivolous and frankly insulting. The claim is legally valid." Patricia said, "The equity was never terminated. Your severance agreement doesn't mention it. Your termination letter doesn't mention it. There is no paperwork anywhere that invalidates Mr. Martinez's ownership stake. You made a mistake, Mr. Chen. It happens. We're prepared to offer a settlement." One of the lawyers said, $20 million, full release of all claims, confidentiality agreement. Mr. Martinez can walk away and rebuild his life. 20 million. The number hung in the air like a golden parachute. 6 months ago, a week ago, maybe even yesterday, I might have taken it. "No," I said. Sarah's eyes widened, Richard's jaw clenched. "Excuse me," David said. "You're washing cars for minimum wage and you're turning down $20 million. "I'm turning down $20 million, I confirmed. "Then you're an idiot," David said. "David," Sarah said quietly. "Don't." 25 million, Richard said. "Final offer. Take it or we'll bury you in litigation. We have resources you can't imagine. We'll fight this for years, decades. You'll spend every penny you have and still lose." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, let me be very clear. My client isn't interested in a buyout. Not at 20 million, not at 50 million, not at any number. He wants what's legally his recognition as a shareholder with full voting rights. That's all." "That's not acceptable," Richard said. "Then we have a problem," Patricia said, "because your IPO prospectus is due for final SEC filing in 6 weeks, and right now it's incomplete. You failed to disclose a material shareholder. That's securities fraud, Mr. Chen. The penalties are severe. The delays could be catastrophic." The room went very quiet. "You're threatening us," Richard said slowly. "I'm stating facts. You have 3 options. Buy him out. He's declined. Fight him in court. That delays your IPO and cost you hundreds of millions. Or recognize his legitimate stake and add him to the prospectus. Those are your choices." "There has to be another way," Sarah said. And she was looking at me now. Really looking at me. "James, please. We can work this out, you and me, like we used to." And there it was. The play Patricia had warned me about, the emotional manipulation, the call back to better days. "There's nothing to work out," I said quietly. "I own 3% of Sterling Group. I've owned it for 10 years. I'm not giving it up. I'm not selling it. I'm keeping what's mine. After everything we gave you," Richard started. "You gave me nothing," I said, and my voice was steady, calm, the calmest I'd felt in months. "I earned everything. Every contract, every deal, every innovation. I built your Asian expansion. I designed your automation systems. I made you billions. And you fired me over dinner like I was nothing. You were family," Sarah said, and her voice cracked. "I was never family. Your mother made that very clear." Richard stood up. "We're done here. You want a war, James? You'll get one." "Mr. Chen," Patricia said, not standing. "The law is very simple. He owns the shares. You can't erase that. You can fight it, waste everyone's time and money, but the outcome is inevitable. Or you can be smart. Add him to the prospectus. Let him keep his 3%. Stay silent. Vote his shares as a block with yours. He's willing to agree to that. You get your IPO. He gets his dignity. Everyone walks away." Richard stared at her, then at me. I watched him calculate, saw the precise moment he realized he'd lost. "I need time," he said finally. "You have until Monday," Patricia said. "After that, we file with the SEC." They left, all of them. Sarah lingering for just a moment at the door, looking back like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. The door closed. Patricia turned to me, grinning. "Well, that went better than expected." I was shaking. Adrenaline, fear, relief, everything at once. "Did we win?" I asked. "What? Yet, but we're close. Very close." My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "We need to talk privately. Just you and me. Please, Sarah." I showed Patricia. She raised an eyebrow. Your call, she said, but be careful. She's either genuinely sorry or she's trying one last play. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't turn my phone back on until Friday morning. When I did, there were 43 missed calls. 17 from Sarah, 12 from David, 8 from unknown numbers. Probably their lawyers trying different tactics. 6 from Richard and just one, from Patricia. They're panicking. Good. Stay strong. The voicemails were a symphony of desperation. David threatening lawsuits. Richard's lawyers using words like tortious interference and bad faith negotiation. And Sarah. Always Sarah. Her voice getting progressively more raw, more real until the last message. Left at 2 o'clock in the morning where she was crying. James, please. I know I don't deserve it, but please just talk to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I need to explain. I need you to understand what happened. What I a long pause. The sound of her breathing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please. I listened to that message 3 times, hating myself for it. Hating that part of me that still remembered loving her, that still heard the girl I proposed to under the Brooklyn Bridge. Not the woman who'd watched me get executed at dinner without saying a word. Marcus noticed me staring at my phone. You okay? Sarah keeps calling. You going to talk to her? I don't know. My lawyer said to be careful that it might be a trap. What does your gut say? I thought about it. My gut said a lot of things. That I missed her. That I hated her. That I wanted to understand how someone could claim to love you and destroy you in the same breath. That maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story than I knew. My gut says I'm an idiot if I meet her. And I said, then don't. But by Saturday afternoon, I texted her back. One conversation, public place, tomorrow, 3 p.m. the coffee shop on Lexington and 52nd. Her response was immediate. Thank you. I'll be there. Sunday arrived wrapped in that particular kind of cold that makes you question every decision that led you outside. I got to the coffee shop at 2:40, ordered a black coffee I didn't drink, and sat at a table by the window where I could see her coming. She arrived at exactly 3:00 p.m. That was so Sarah, punctual to the point of compulsion, another trait she'd inherited from Richard. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down, no makeup. She looked smaller, somehow, younger, more like the woman I'd married and less like the stranger who'd divorced me. She ordered tea, chamomile, no sugar, the same thing she always ordered when she was stressed, and sat down across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Thank you for meeting me, she said finally. I'm not sure why I did. Because you're a better person than I am. She wrapped her hands around her cup, not drinking. James, I need you to know that I didn't want to do it. Any of it. The firing, the divorce, any of it. But you did it anyway. Yes, I did it anyway. She looked up at me and her eyes were red-rimmed. Do you remember when we first got engaged? What my father said. I remembered. We'd been in his office showing him the ring I'd saved for months to buy. Richard had smiled, shook my hand, and then said, welcome to the family. Just remember family is everything. Loyalty is everything. He said family is everything. I said he said loyalty is everything. Sarah receded. And I believed him. I still believe him. That's the problem. I was loyal to him. I said I gave him 10 years. I gave him everything. You were loyal to the company. Not to him, not to us. Not really. She saw my expression and held up a hand. I know how that sounds. I know it's not fair, but that's how he sees it. You were always an outsider, James. You worked harder than anyone, sacrificed more than anyone, but you were never one of us. Not really. Because I didn't have the right last name. Because you didn't think like us. She leaned forward. The Melbourne deal. Do you remember what my father wanted to do? I remembered Richard had wanted to lowball the Australian partners, squeeze them on terms, use sterling's size as a weapon. I'd argued against it, said it was short-sighted, that we needed them more than they needed us. I'd negotiated a fair deal instead. Both sides won. The contract was worth billions. I made sterling $2 billion. I said, you made them partners instead of servants. Sarah said, that's what my father couldn't forgive. You treated people like equals. You built relationships instead of empires. You thought business was about collaboration. He thinks it's about conquest. So he fired me for being decent. He fired you for being different. For showing David that there was another way to run a company, a better way. She was crying now. Quiet tears that she kept wiping away with the back of her hand. David looks up to you. You know, he always has. That's why my father wanted you gone, because you were the son he wishes he had, and David knew it, and it was destroying their relationship. The words hit me like cold water. David hates me. David hates that my father respects you more than him. Respected. Past tense. Now my father has to pretend you were always worthless. Because admitting the truth that he fired the best executive he ever had would mean admitting he was wrong. And Richard Chen doesn't do wrong. And you? I asked. Where do you fit into this? She looked down at her tea. I'm his daughter. I'm supposed to be loyal to family above everything. That's what I was raised to believe. That's what he's always taught me. So when he said you had to go, she trailed off. You chose him over me. I chose family over everything. The way I was taught, the way I thought I was supposed to. She looked up at me and the pain in her eyes looked real. It probably was real. That was the worst part. I've regretted it every day since. Every single day. But not enough to do anything about it. Not enough to call me. Not enough to tell your father he was wrong. I'm here now. She said, you're here now because I have leverage. Because I own shares you forgot about. If I was still washing cars and you'd already gotten the divorce you wanted, would you be here? She didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, suddenly exhausted. Why are we really here? I want to explain. I want you to understand that I never stopped caring about you. That this wasn't personal. It was just business. Family business. You fired me over dinner and divorced me over courier. And you think it wasn't personal? I think it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I think I lost myself doing it. I think I've been trying to figure out who I am without you. And I don't like what I've found. She reached across the table, put her hand on mine. It was warm, familiar. Once upon a time, that touch meant safety. Home. Let this go, she said softly. Please take the money my father's offering. 30 million. We'll go to 40 if that's what it takes. 50. Name your price. Take it and walk away. Build a new life. Find someone better than me. Be happy. And you get the IPO. Your family gets their billions. Everyone wins except the guy who actually built the company. Everyone wins, including you, James. $50 million is more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. You could do anything. Go anywhere. You'd never have to work again. Is that what you think I want? To never work again? I think you deserve peace. I think you deserve to not be angry anymore. I think you deserve better than this fight. I pulled my hand away. You know what I realized? Sitting on that couch in Queens, the couch I had to sleep on because you took the apartment I paid for. I realized you never really knew me at all. That's not true. You think this is about money? I said, cutting her off. You think everything is about money because that's how your family thinks. But I don't want their money, Sarah. I want them to acknowledge what I built. I want my name on something I created. I want proof that I wasn't nothing. She was shaking her head, tears streaming freely now. You were never nothing. I never thought you were nothing. You watched your mother call me weak and you said nothing. You sat there while your father executed my career and you said nothing. You've been saying nothing for 10 years, Sarah. Your silence said everything. I was wrong, she whispered. I know I was wrong. I've known it since the day you walked out of that restaurant. I knew it when I signed the divorce papers. I know it every morning when I wake up and you're not there. Then why didn't you call? Why didn't you fight for me? Because I'm a coward, she said, and the words came out like a confession. Because I've spent my entire life doing what my father tells me to do, being who he wants me to be. Because the one time I chose something for myself, chose you, he made me feel like I was betraying everyone. And I couldn't handle it. So, I took the easy way out. I let him make you the villain, and I pretended to believe it. I wanted to hate her. It would have been easier if I could just hate her. But sitting across from her, watching her fall apart, all I felt was tired. Your father's wrong about the shares, I said quietly. Patricia checked everything. The equity is mine. Legally, indisputably mine. He can't make it go away. I know. His lawyers told him the same thing. She wiped her eyes. He's furious at them, at me, at the universe, but mostly at himself. He made a mistake and he can't fix it by being Richard Chen. He can't intimidate it away or buy it away or will it away, and that's destroying him. Good. She flinched. James, no. He destroyed me, Sarah. He took everything I worked for and threw it away like garbage. He told everyone in the industry I was incompetent. Made sure I couldn't get hired anywhere. Your mother watched me wash cars and laughed about it. You all treated me like I was disposable. So, forgive me if I don't feel sympathy for Richard Chen having a bad week. It's more than a bad week. The IPO is in jeopardy. The investors are getting nervous. David is panicking because he doesn't actually know how to run operations. He's been faking it, using all your old systems and pretending he invented them. The whole thing is falling apart. Part of me felt vindicated. The larger part felt nothing. They'd built their house on sand and called it a castle. Now the tide was coming in. What do you want me to say? I said. They asked. I want you to tell me what it would take. Not for the money, not for the IPO, for you. What would it take for you to walk away from this and find peace? I thought about it. Really thought about it. What did I want? Revenge felt empty. Victory felt hollow. Even the $57 million, a number that should have meant everything, felt increasingly irrelevant. I want them to tell the truth, I said finally. I want Richard to admit publicly that I built that Asian expansion, that the automation systems were my design, that the Melbourne deal happened because of my work. I want my name in the IPO prospectus with proper attribution. I want everyone who invested in Sterling Group to know that the foundation they're betting on was built by me. Sarah stared at me. He'll never do that. You know he won't. Then I keep my shares. I vote against every board decision. I attend every shareholder meeting. I become a permanent reminder of his mistake for the rest of his life. That's not peace, James. That's prison for both of you. Maybe. But it's honest prison. No more pretending. She stood up, grabbing her purse. I can't help you if this is what you want. I came here hoping you'd be reasonable. Hoping we could find a middle ground. There is no middle ground between truth and lies, Sarah. That's the problem. You keep trying to find compromise in places where compromise is just another word for eraser. She looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. You've changed. I've clarified there's a difference. I miss who you were. The man who would have forgiven me. Who would have chosen peace over principle. That man washed your family's cars and got called weak for it. I'm someone else now. She left without another word. I sat there with my cold coffee and watched her disappear into the Sunday afternoon crowd and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, just the quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. My phone rang an hour later. Patricia, Sarah Chen just left my office, she said. She came by unannounced, wanted to make one final plea. She offered $75 million on behalf of her father. Full buyout, confidentiality agreement, and a reference letter saying you left Sterling on good terms. $75 million? The number didn't even sound real anymore. I'm assuming you told her no, I said. I told her I'd relay the offer to my client. That's you, by the way. So, I'm asking, do you want to consider it? Do you think I should? I think $75 million would solve a lot of problems. I also think you've made it very clear this isn't about money. But, James, I need you to understand something. If we reject this offer and move forward, things get ugly. Really ugly. They'll come after you personally, dig up everything, try to destroy your credibility, make you regret ever filing this claim. I worked for them for 10 years. They know everything about me already. You'd be surprised what people can weaponize when they're desperate. Old emails taken out of context. Colleagues who will testify you were difficult to work with. They'll paint you as greedy, vindictive, someone who's trying to exploit a technicality to steal from a family that gave you everything. None of that is true. Truth doesn't matter when you control the narrative. They have PR firms, media connections, money to make you the villain. Are you ready for that? I thought about Linda's face through that car window. David's smug smile at that dinner table. Richard's dismissive tone when he fired me like I was nothing. Sarah's cold eyes as she chose her family over everything we'd built together. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Okay, then. I'll inform them the offer is rejected. Tomorrow morning, we'll file with the SEC. By tomorrow afternoon, this becomes a public matter. There's no going back after that. Good. James, one more thing. When this hits the news, and it will hit the news, your life changes. Reporters will call. Investors will want to know who you are. Sterling's competitors will reach out. You won't be anonymous anymore. You won't be able to go back to washing cars and living quietly. Is that what you want? I looked around Marcus's apartment, the couch that had been my home for 4 months. The life I'd built in the wreckage of the old one. Simple, honest, small. I don't know what I want yet, I said. But I know what I don't want. I don't want to disappear. I don't want them to write my story. I don't want another 30 years wondering if I was really as worthless as they made me feel. Fair enough. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. I didn't rest. I went to the car wash Monday morning, my last shift before everything changed. And I worked like I'd worked every day for the past 4 months. Carlos noticed something was different. You seem lighter, man, he he said during lunch. Like you're carrying less weight. Maybe I am, I said. You hear back about that legal thing? Yeah, it's happening today, actually. Good news or bad news? Yes, he laughed. Cryptic. I like it. Well, whatever it is, I owe you deserve something good. You're a good dude. Jimmy, best work ethic I've ever seen. You ever want a reference, I got you. The simplicity of it almost broke me. This man, who knew nothing about my past or my degrees or my accomplishments, valued me for showing up on time and doing honest work. It was the purest respect I'd received in years. Thanks, Carlos. That means a lot. At 2:47 p.m., while I was drying off Alexis, my phone buzzed. Patricia, it's done. SEC filing submitted. Sterling Group is now officially required to address the shareholder discrepancy in their prospectus. Expect fireworks. At 3:15 p.m., the first news alert popped up. Sterling Group IPO faces unexpected shareholder dispute. The article was brief, just the facts. Former executive claiming ownership stake. SEC investigating discrepancy. Potential impact on $24 billion valuation. By 4 p.m. my phone was ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers, reporters probably. I ignored them all. By 5 p.m. the story had grown. Bloomberg picked it up. Then Reuters, then the Wall Street Journal. Sterling Group's hidden shareholder, former COO, claimed $78 stake. Tommy called me into the office at 5:30. He had his laptop open, an article on the screen. He looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. James Martinez, he read aloud, former chief operating officer of Sterling Group, claiming 0.3% equity stake valued at approximately $70 million. James, is this you? I nodded. You're a millionaire. Not yet. Maybe never. It's complicated. He sat back in his chair processing. You've been washing cars for 4 months. You're potentially worth $70 million and you've been washing cars. I needed the work. I needed to remember what honest work felt like. He laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. You're either the craziest or the chest person I've ever met. I can't decide which. Can I finish my shift? Are you kidding? Get out of here. Go deal with whatever this is. And James, he stood up, extended his hand. It's been an honor having you. Not because of the money or the company or any of that. Because you showed up every day and did the work without complaining. That's character. That matters more than all the millions in the world. I shook his hand, feeling a lump in my throat. Thanks, Tommy, for everything. For giving me a chance when no one else would. You ever need a reference? You know where to find me. I left the car wash for the last time and walked to Marcus's apartment through the early evening cold. The city felt different somehow, sharper, more alive. Or maybe I was just paying attention again. Marcus was already home when I arrived, his laptop open. The news on the screen. Dude, he said, dude, you're on Bloomberg. You're on CNBC. They're talking about you on the business channels. I know. $70 million, James. $70 million. I know. And you didn't tell me. We've been eating ramen for months and you potentially own $70 million. I didn't own anything until today. Until this morning, it was just a maybe, a hope. Now it's real. He closed his laptop, looked at me seriously. What happens now? I don't know. Patricia says Sterling has 30 days to respond to the SEC. They'll probably try to fight it. Claim the shares are invalid somehow. Drag it out. But you'll win. She thinks so. The law is pretty clear. Then you're rich. You're actually going to be rich. I sat down on the couch, my couch, the one that had been my home through the worst months of my life, and tried to process what that meant. You know what's weird? I said, I thought getting here would feel different. I thought I'd feel victorious or powerful or something, but I just feel tired. That's because you're not done yet, Marcus said. This is just round one. They're going to come at you with everything now, and you've got to be ready. He was right. My phone kept buzzing. Texts from Patricia, emails from reporters, voicemails from lawyers and investors, and people I'd never heard of. The quiet life I'd built was over. Whatever came next would be public, messy, complicated. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of complicated. I was ready for it. At midnight, one last text came through from Sarah. You won. I hope it was worth it. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I didn't win anything yet. I just stopped losing. She didn't reply. I lay down on the couch and stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The dinner that destroyed me. The car wash that rebuilt me. The lawyer who believed me. The client who remembered me. The numbers that proved I'd never been nothing. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. Richard Chen would mobilize his entire empire against me. The lawyers would file motions. The media would dig into my past. The machine I'd helped build would try to crush me. But tonight, I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not hope that I'd win. Not hope that I'd get rich. Not even hope that I'd get the recognition I deserved. Just hope that I'd proven, at least to myself, that Linda Chen was wrong. I was never the weak one. I was the one who survived. The reporters found Marcus's apartment building by Tuesday morning. I woke up to the sound of someone buzzing the intercom, insistent and repetitive. When I looked out the window, there were 3 news vans parked on the street, cameras pointed at the entrance like weapons. "You're famous," Marcus said, peering over at my shoulder. Or infamous. I can't tell which. Patricia called at 7 a.m. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer the door. Don't post anything on social media. Sterling's PR machine is already spinning this, and we need to control the narrative. What are they saying? That you're a disgruntled ex-employee trying to extort money from a family business, that the equity stake was a clerical error you're exploiting, that you signed documents years ago waiving your ownership rights but conveniently lost them. They're painting you as opportunistic and vindictive. None of that is true. I know. But they don't need truth. They need reasonable doubt. By the time we prove them wrong, the damage to your reputation will be done. That's the strategy. Make you toxic so that even if you win legally, you lose practically. So what do? We file our response. We let the facts speak. And we wait for them to make a mistake. They will. Desperation breeds errors. Richard Chen's not used to fighting defensive battles. He'll overreach. She was right about the desperation. By noon, Sterling Group had filed 3 separate motions. One to dismiss my claim as frivolous. One to freeze any potential distribution of shares pending litigation, and one requesting an emergency injunction to prevent me from voting my shares at any future shareholder meetings. Patricia called them legal spam, volume over substance. By Wednesday, the story had evolved. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature, The $70 Million Question, Did Sterling Group's Family Dynasty Forget Their Star Employee? The article was surprisingly balanced. Detailing my role in the Asian expansion, the automation systems, the Melbourne Mayan deal. They'd interviewed former colleagues who went on record saying I'd been the operational genius behind Sterling's transformation. They'd also interviewed David, who called me a talented employee who never understood the difference between doing your job and owning the company. The phrase made my blood boil. Doing your job like 10 years of ADR weeks, missed anniversaries, sacrificed health was just clocking in and out. But the article also included something I hadn't expected. A quote from Robert Kleinfeld. James Martinez was the most capable executive I've encountered in 30 years of business. If Sterling Group built an empire in Asia, he was the architect. The Kins may have provided the capital in the name, but Martinez provided the vision. History will remember that even if they'd prefer it didn't. I called him that afternoon. Thank you for the quote. You didn't have to do that. I didn't do it for you, he said, though his tone was kind. I did it for accuracy and because watching Richard Chen squirm is excellent entertainment. How are you holding up? I'm surviving barely. That's all you need to do. Survive longer than they can maintain the pressure. Rich people get bored easily, stay boring, stay consistent, and they'll eventually cave. You really think so? I know. So, I've seen this play out 100 times. The only question is whether you have the stomach for it. I thought about that a lot over the next few days. Did I have the stomach for this? Every morning brought new attacks. Sterling's lawyers filed motion after motion. Each one more aggressive than the last. They demanded access to my financial records, claiming I'd mismanaged company funds during my tenure. They subpoenaed my emails, looking for anything that could be twisted into malfeasance. They even reached out to the car wash asking questions about my mental state and whether I'd exhibited unstable behavior. Tommy called to warn me. Some fancy lawyer came by asking about you. I told him you were the best employee I ever had and he could shove his questions. But James, what the hell is going on? They're trying to make you sound crazy. They're trying to discredit me, make me seem like I'm having a breakdown so my claim looks less legitimate. That's disgusting. That's business. At least the version of it. The media attention intensified. Business Insider ran a profile from COO to car wash. The spectacular fall of James Martinez. The article recounted my dismissal, my subsequent unemployment, my work at Tommy's car wash. They made it sound romantic, like I'd chosen this path deliberately, some kind of philosophical journey into humility. The reality, sleeping on a couch, skipping meals to save money, The crushing weight of professional annihilation didn't make it into the narrative. But the article did something unexpected. It humanized me. Suddenly, I wasn't just a legal case or a business dispute. I was a person, someone who'd fallen and gotten back up. Someone who'd worked with his hands when his brain wasn't wanted anymore. The public response surprised everyone. Social media exploded with hashtags. Had justice for James #Sterling. Group exposed #CarWashGo. People shared stories of being dismissed by family businesses, of building things for others only to be discarded. My story became their story. Patricia called Thursday afternoon. "You're trending." Like actually trending. Twitter, LinkedIn, even TikTok. There are memes. Good memes. You've become a folk hero. I don't want to be a folk hero. I just want what's mine. Well, you're both now and it's working in our favor. Sterling's PR team is scrambling. They didn't anticipate public sentiment turning against them. Rich family screwing over loyal employee plays very differently in 2025 than it would have 20 years ago. Does public opinion matter legally? Not directly, but it matters to investors. It matters to the SEC, who's now under public pressure to investigate thoroughly. It matters to Sterling's board, who's fielding as uncomfortable questions about corporate governance. Public opinion is leverage, James, and right now we have it. Friday brought the turning point. I was at a coffee shop in the village, hiding from the reporter still camped outside Marcus Building, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. James Martinez. A woman's voice, professional, but warm. Yes. My name is Helen Reeves. I'm the CFO of Meridian Holdings. We're a private equity firm focused on logistics and supply chain investments. I've been following your situation with great interest. Okay, I said cautiously. I'll get to the point. We've been looking at Sterling Group for 2 years, considering a potential investment or acquisition. Your case has revealed some very interesting information about the company's operational structure and leadership. Information that suggests the business you built might be separable from the family that owns it. I'm not sure I follow. What if you didn't have to fight Sterling for your shares? What if there was another option? We'd like to meet with you, discuss a potential opportunity. No obligations, just a conversation. I told Patricia about the call that evening. She was silent for a long moment. This is either brilliant or dangerous, she said finally. Maybe both. What did you tell her? That I'd think about it. Smart. Here is what's happening. Meridian smells blood in the water. They're thinking that if Sterling's internal structure is fractured enough, if the family's fighting publicly with a shareholder, there might be an opportunity to acquire the company at a discount or to poach key assets. Your involvement makes you valuable to them and them. So, they want to use me. They want to work with you. There's a difference. James, what if you didn't have to fight Richard for scraps? What if you could actually build something new through your expertise, your reputation, your sudden public platform to create something that's entirely yours? The idea took root immediately, not fighting for what I built at Sterling, but building something new, something better, something that proved I'd never needed them at all. Set up the meeting, I said. The meeting happened Monday at Meridian's offices. Glass and steel on Park Avenue. The kind of place where decisions worth billions happened over coffee that cost more than most people's lunches. Helen Reeves was 50-ish, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without realizing it. Mr. Martinez, she said, shaking my hand. Thank you for coming. I'll dispense with the pleasantries. We've been watching Sterling Group's growth trajectory with increasing concern. They've expanded rapidly, but the infrastructure is shaky. The automation systems, your systems are brilliant, but they're not being properly maintained. The Asian partnerships you built are fraying because no one there understands the relationships like you did. The Melbourne deal is already showing stress fractures. David doesn't know what he's doing, I said. Correct. He's a placeholder wearing your shoes and everyone knows it. The company is worth $20 billion on paper, but without the operational genius that built it, that valuation is fantasy. Which brings me to our proposal. She slid a folder across the table. We want to build a competitor, a logistics and supply chain company that does everything Sterling does, but better. More ethical partnerships, more innovative automation, better treatment of employees. We provide the capital, a $200 million Series A to start. You provide the expertise, the leadership in your name, which is currently worth more than you realize. I stared at the folder without opening it. You want me to compete directly with Sterling? We want you to build what Sterling should have been, what it would have been if it weren't hobbled by family politics and ego. James, you're in a unique position. You have public sympathy, industry respect, and a legitimate grievance. You also have something Sterling can never buy. Moral authority. People want to see you succeed now. They want to see the underdog win. That's worth more than marketing, more than brand recognition. That's cultural capital. And your stake, 60% initial equity, decreasing to 40% over 5 years as you hit performance milestones. You'd be CEO, full operational control, board seat guaranteed. We're investors, not operators. We back people who know what they're doing and stay out of their way. I opened the folder. The terms were generous, absurdly generous, more than fair. Why me? I asked. You could hire any consultant, any operations expert. Why build a company around someone who's currently being sued by their former employer? Helen smiled. Because you're not just someone, you're a story. You're proof that talent matters more than pedigree. That hard work matters more than birthright. In an age where people are exhausted by dynasty and nepotism, you're something rare. Someone who earned everything and got screwed for it. That's not just good business, Mr. Martinez. That's justice. And justice sells. I thought about it. Really thought about it. This wasn't about fighting Sterling anymore. This was about proving I could build something better without them. About taking everything they tried to destroy and using it to create something they could never compete with. What about my Sterling shares? I asked. I'm still fighting for those. Keep fighting. Win if you can. We don't care about your past compensation. We care about your future value. Though I'll admit, watching Richard Chen's face when his former employee becomes his biggest competitor would be satisfying for everyone involved. Patricia had been quiet throughout the meeting. Now she spoke up. What's the timeline? We'd like to move fast. Formal term sheet by end of week. Initial funding within 30 days. Operations launch within 90. Sterling's IPO is scheduled for March. We'd like to be operational by February. Generating press about the ethical alternative to Sterling Group. Make investors think twice about where they put their money. That's aggressive. Patricia said that's necessary. Window of opportunity is small. Right now, James is sympathetic. 6 months from now, he's old news. We need to move while the narrative is fresh. I looked at Patricia. She gave me a small nod. The lawyer equivalent of this is legitimate. I need time to think, I said. Of course, you have until Friday. After that, we pursue other options. Helen stood, extended her hand again. James, I've built 6 companies from scratch. I know talent when I see it. You're the real deal. Sterling Group's loss is someone's enormous gain. I'd like it to be ours. We left the meeting and walked 3 blocks before either of us spoke. She's not wrong, Patricia said finally, about any of it. This could be huge or it could blow up spectacularly. Life's binary like that sometimes, safe or spectacular. Rarely both. What do you think I should do? She stopped walking, looked at me directly. I think you should ask yourself what you're actually fighting for. If it's recognition from the Kins, you'll never get it. They'll die before they admit you were valuable. But if it's proof to yourself, proof to the world that you were never nothing. This does that. This does that louder than any shareholder statement or IPO filing ever could. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on Marcus's couch, though he'd started calling it the $70 million couch, which made us both laugh, and thought about everything. 2 paths. Fight Sterling for what was mine. Drag it through courts and media and years of exhausting battle, or build something new, something better, something entirely mine from the beginning. My phone buzzed, text from Sarah. We need to talk. My father is willing to negotiate, please, before this gets worse. I stared at the message, then typed back, there's nothing to negotiate. I'm done fighting over scraps. Her response came immediately. What does that mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled up Helen Reeves's number and started composing an email. The subject line was simple. I'm in. The term sheet arrived Wednesday morning. 47 pages of legal precision that essentially said, we believe in you enough to bet $200 million on it. I read it 3 times with Patricia, then once more alone, making sure I understood every clause, every contingency, every way this could either liberate me or bind me to something worse than Sterling ever was. It's clean, Patricia said after our final review. Remarkably clean. No hidden traps, no poison pills. The equity vesting schedule is aggressive but fair. The performance milestones are ambitious but achievable. Helen Reeves wasn't lying. They really do want you to succeed. And if I fail, then you fail with $200 million of their money, not yours. You are risking your reputation and your time. They're risking capital. That's the deal. That's always the deal. I signed it Thursday afternoon in Meridian's conference room, the same room where Helen had made her pitch. This time there were more people, lawyers, accountants, board members, all watching as I put my name on something that would either validate everything I'd ever believed about myself or prove that I'd been lucky once and foolish twice. "Congratulations," Helen said, shaking my hand. "You're now the CEO of Martinez Global Logistics. We've already filed the corporate paperwork, secured the initial banking relationships, and leased office space in Long Island City. You start Monday." "Martinez Global Logistics," I said. "That's the name. Your reputation is the brand. People want to work with you, invest in you, believe in you. We're not hiding that. We're celebrating it." She handed me a folder. Inside, you'll find preliminary budgets, hiring authority, and a list of consultants we've identified who might be interested in jumping ship from Sterling. All former colleagues of yours, all people who've reached out expressing interest in working with you again. I opened the folder, 23 names, people I'd worked with, trained, mentored, operations managers, logistics coordinators, systems architects, the backbone of what I'd built at Sterling. They'd leave Sterling to work with me. They already want to. We've had preliminary conversations with 14 of them. All expressed enthusiasm. Most are just waiting for the official offer. "James, you weren't just good at your job. You were the reason a lot of talented people stayed at Sterling as long as they did. You created loyalty. Now you get to benefit from it." The news broke Friday morning. Business Insider ran it first. Former Sterling COO launches competitor with $200 backing. By noon, it was everywhere. Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC, Wall Street Journal. The narrative wrote itself. Disgraced executive rises from car wash to CEO, backed by major private equity firm, preparing to challenge the family business that destroyed him. Sterling stock, they'd done a small private placement ahead of the IPO, dropped 4% on the news. My phone exploded. Reporters, investors, former colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanting to reconnect. I ignored most of them, but I did answer when Robert Kleinfeld called. "Congratulations," he said. "Though, I'm not surprised. I told you survival was the strategy. You've done more than survive." "I haven't done anything yet. Right now, it's just a term sheet and a dream. It's more than that. It's a threat to Sterling, to Richard, to the entire narrative. They've been building about you being worthless. You've turned their biggest weapon, your dismissal, into your greatest asset. That's rare. That's smart. I had good help. You had good instincts. The help just gave you permission to trust them." Sarah called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short, clipped, professional. "We need to discuss your new venture. There are legal implications regarding non-compete clauses in intellectual property. Call me back." I forwarded it to Patricia without listening to it again. "They're panicking," Patricia said when she called back. "I've received similar messages from their legal team. They're claiming you're violating your severance agreement, that there was an implied non-compete, that you're using Sterling's trade secrets. It's all bluster. Your severance agreement specifically allowed you to work in the industry. There's nothing about not competing. They're just scared. Should I be worried? Only if you actually are using their trade secrets. Are you? No. Everything I'm building is based on my own knowledge, my own experience. I'm not taking files or client lists or proprietary systems. I'm just doing what I know how to do. Then they can threaten all they want. They won't win. But James, be prepared. They're going to try to make this ugly. They'll claim you're stealing clients, poaching employees, undermining their business. The fact that you're actually just competing fairly won't stop them from claiming otherwise." She was right. By Monday morning, my first official day as CEO of Martinez Global, Sterling had filed an emergency motion seeking to block me from hiring any former Sterling employees, claiming I was engaging in a coordinated campaign of corporate raiding. Helen Reeves laughed when she saw it. "They're terrified. Employees wanting to work for you isn't raiding. It's consequences. Maybe if they treated people better, they wouldn't be fleeing at the first opportunity." We held our first company meeting that afternoon in temporary office space. Just 12 people, the core team Helen and I had assembled. 4 former Sterling employees who'd officially resigned that morning. 3 consultants with deep logistics experience. 2 tech specialists Helen had recruited from a failed startup, an HR director, a CFO, and me. "Thank you all for being here," I started. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, authoritative but uncertain, like I was trying on a suit that didn't quite fit yet. Most of you know my story. Some of you lived parts of it with me at Sterling. All of you are here because you believe in what we're trying to build. Not just another logistics company, but a better one. One that treats employees like assets, not expenses. One that builds partnerships, not dependencies. One that proves success doesn't require cruelty. I looked around the room, 12 faces, all of them trusting me with their careers, their futures, their belief that I was worth the risk. I can't promise this will be easy. Sterling is going to come after us. They have more money, more connections, more brand recognition. But we have something they don't. We're right. Not morally right, though I believe we are right, strategically right, operationally right about how this industry is evolving, and if we execute well, if we stay focused and stay ethical, we won't just compete with Sterling, we'll make them irrelevant. The speech was met with applause, genuine enthusiastic applause that made something tight in my chest loosen slightly afterward. Marcus Chen, no relation to the otherkins, he liked to joke. One of the former Sterling operations managers pulled me aside. I need you to know something. And he said, when David took over your role, he called a meeting, told everyone that you'd been let go because you weren't family material, that you'd never really understood the business, that you'd gotten lucky with a few deals but didn't have real vision. Half the room knew it was, the other half wanted to believe it. Because believing otherwise meant admitting they work for people who destroy talent out of spite. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're up against. It's not just Richard and David. It's everyone at Sterling who's invested in the lie that you didn't matter. If you succeed, if this company thrives, it proves they've been propping up mediocrity and calling it excellence. They can't afford for you to win. It would shatter their entire self-concept. Good. Hashiman said, let it shatter. The first month was chaos. Beautiful, exhausting chaos. We worked 18-hour days building systems, establishing protocols, reaching out to potential clients. I was doing everything: operations, strategy, sales, even some IT troubleshooting. When our systems crashed at 2 o'clock in the morning, it was exactly like the early days at Sterling, except this time I owned it. This time, my name was on the door. We landed our first client in week 3, a mid-size manufacturing company that had been using Sterling for distribution. They'd heard about Martinez Global, reached out directly, said they wanted to work with the guy who actually built Sterling's Asian network, not the kid who inherited it. The contract was small, $2.3 million annually, but it was proof of concept. We could compete. We could win. Sterling's response was immediate and vicious. They called our new client, offered them a 50% discount to stay. The client called me, told me about the offer, asked what we could do. Nothing. I said, we can't match that. They're operating at a loss to keep you. It's not sustainable. So, I should take their offer. You should do what makes sense for your business. If price is all that matters, take Sterling's deal. But understand, they're only doing this because they're afraid. Once we're gone, once the threat is eliminated, that discount disappears. You'll be right back where you started. Except now you'll know they see you as a pawn, not a partner. The client thought about it for 2 days, then called back. We're staying with you, not because of price, because we trust you. That's worth more than 50%. We celebrated that night, the whole team. Pizza and beer in our barely furnished office. All of us knowing we'd won something bigger than a contract. We'd won respect. But Sterling wasn't done. They filed another lawsuit in week 5, claiming we'd stolen their client list. We hadn't. The client had come to us, but the accusation itself was damaged enough. 2 other prospects who'd been considering us suddenly went quiet. This is the strategy, Patricia explained. Death by 1,000 lawsuits. They don't need to win. They just need to make working with you seem risky, complicated, litigious. They're trying to poison your reputation with enough legal smoke that potential clients can't see the fire isn't real. How do we fight it? We win one decisively. We take one of their lawsuits to court and we embarrass them publicly. Make an example. Show everyone else that their threats are empty. We picked the client stealing claim. It was the most obviously false, the easiest to disprove. Patricia filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, arguing the claim was frivolous and possibly sanctionable. The hearing was scheduled for mid-December, 2 months after I'd signed with Men, 3 months after the SEC filing that had started everything. I walked into that courtroom wearing the same JCPenney suit I'd worn to my last day at Sterling, now properly fitted because I could afford a tailor. Richard was there sitting in the front row with David and a phalanx of lawyers. Sarah wasn't. I didn't know if that meant something or nothing. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Brennan, known for not tolerating nonsense. She listened to Sterling's lawyer argue that we'd engaged in systematic targeting of Sterling Group clients using proprietary information obtained during Mr. Martinez's employment. Then Patricia stood up. Your Honor, this claim is not just without merit, it's demonstrably false. The client in question, Dilmare Manufacturing, initiated contact with Martinez Global Logistics. We have emails, phone records, and sworn testimony from their CEO. Sterling Group is attempting to use this court to prevent legitimate business competition. They're embarrassed that a former employee is succeeding without them. So, they're trying to criminalize success. It's petty. It's baseless, and it's wasting this court's time. She submitted documentation, phone logs, emails, a letter from Dilmare's CEO explicitly stating they'd sought us out, that no one from Martinez Global had ever contacted them first. Judge Brennan read everything in silence. Then she looked at Sterling's lawyers. Do you have any evidence at all, that Mr. Martinez or his company initiated this relationship? Sterling's lead counsel hesitated. We believe there must have been preliminary contact. That isn't documented. Belief isn't evidence, counselor. This is a court of law, not a court of imagination. Do you have evidence? We believe further discovery would reveal. That's a no. Judge Brennan closed the file. Motion to dismiss granted. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees to the defendants. Sterling Group, you've attempted to use litigation as a competitive weapon. That's not what our legal system is for. Consider this a warning. File another frivolous suit against Martinez Global and I'll consider sanctions. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. We'd won. Richard stood up and walked out without looking at me. David followed, his face red with fury. Their lawyers gathered their materials in embarrassed silence. Patricia turned to me, grinning. And that's how you slay a dragon. The news spread fast. That night, Business Insider ran it. Judge slammed Sterling Group for frivolous lawsuit against former executive. The article was brutal, detailing how Sterling had tried and failed to use legal intimidation, how the judge had awarded us fees, how we'd proven our legitimacy. My phone started ringing immediately. 3 new client inquiries, 2 former Sterling employees asking about positions, a reporter from Forbes requesting an interview for a feature on ethical business alternatives. We'd been in business for 2 months, and we were already becoming something real. That night, I went back to Marcus's apartment, still my home. Though I could afford my own place now. I just hadn't had time to move. Marcus was waiting with champagne. You won, he said, popping the bottle. You actually won. One battle, not the war. Yeah, but James, it's still a win. After everything they did to you, after all the ways they tried to destroy you, you stood in a courtroom and a judge told them they were wrong. That's not nothing. That's everything. I took the champagne glass, let myself feel the moment. He was right. It was everything. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. This is Linda Chen. We need to talk. Please call me. I stared at the message for a long time. The woman who'd called me weak, who'd sneered at me washing cars, who'd made it clear I'd never be family. Now she wanted to talk. I showed Marcus. He whistled low. What are you going to do? I thought about everything that had happened, everything that had changed. About the boy who'd wanted so desperately to belong to their family and the man who had realized he didn't need to. I deleted the message without responding. I'm going to keep building, I said. That's what I'm going to do. 6 months after I'd signed those first papers with Patricia Wong, Martinez Global Logistics had grown from 12 people in temporary office space to 87 employees across 3 locations. We'd landed 19 major clients, 8 of them former Sterling accounts who'd switched because they trusted me more than they trusted David's fumbling attempts to replicate what I'd built. Our revenue projections for year 1 had been conservative. Helen Reeves had estimated $40 million. We were on track to hit $73 million. Sterling's IPO scheduled for March had been delayed twice. First to May, then to July. Investor confidence was shaky. The lawsuits they'd filed against me, all dismissed or withdrawn, had raised questions about management stability. David's operational failures were becoming impossible to hide. Their Q1 earnings released in April showed declining margins in Asia and problems with the Melbourne contract I'd negotiated years ago. Turns out relationships matter. Turns out you can't just inherit expertise. The business press was having a field day. Forbes ran a cover story in May. The Revenge of James Martinez. How a fired executive built a better company. The article detailed everything. The dinner that destroyed me. The car wash that humbled me. The lawyer who armed me, the company that validated me. It painted Richard Chen as a cautionary tale about hubris and family politics. It painted me as proof that talent finds a way. But the real turning point came in June. Patricia called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying something I'd rarely heard from her. Excitement. Remember how Sterling's been fighting to keep your original equity stake tied up in litigation? She said, claiming it was invalid, that you'd waived it, that there were verbal agreements nullifying it. Hard to forget, they filed 18 motions. 19. But I've got news. The judge just ruled final ruling. No more ice peels. Your equity stake is valid. All of it. 3% of Sterling Group belongs to you. Free and clear. They have to add you to the shareholder register immediately. I sat down. The office around me, my office in a building with my name on it, seemed to tilt slightly. How much? I asked. Based on their most recent valuation, which was filed with the SEC last month, $72.4 million. And James, it gets better. Because of the delays they caused, because of all the litigation they forced, the judge is awarding you damages. Another $6.3 million to cover legal fees and lost opportunity costs. You're a $78.7 million man officially. I couldn't speak. The number was too big, too surreal. A year ago, I'd been washing cars for tips. 6 months ago, I'd been sleeping on Marca's couch eating ramen. Now, there's more. Patricia continued, the judge included language in the ruling, strong language. She said Sterling's attempts to invalidate your equity were bad faith litigation designed to deprive Mr. Martinez of his lawful ownership interest. She essentially called them out for corporate bullying. That language is going to be cited in business law classes for years. You didn't just win, James. You won decisively. You won on the record. You won in a way that will follow them forever. When do I get the money? They have 30 days to execute the transfer. My guess they'll try to negotiate one more time, offer you a settlement to avoid the public spectacle of you officially becoming a shareholder. But James, you don't need to settle anymore. You've already won. This is just deciding whether you want the money now or the satisfaction of watching them squirm forever. I thought about it. $78 million would change everything. I could expand Martinez Global faster, hire more people, compete more aggressively. I could buy a house, help Marcus, never worry about money again. But being a Sterling Group shareholder, having my name in their prospectus, attending their annual meetings, voting on their decisions, that was something else. That was permanent proof. That was the receipt. I want the shares, I said, not a buyout. The actual shares. I want my name in their prospectus. I want to sit in their annual meeting. I want them to see me every single time they celebrate success that I built. Patricia laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll file the paperwork this afternoon. The news broke within hours. Bloomberg Sterling Group forced to recognize former executive 78 stake. Wall Street Journal judge rules against her against Sterling and shareholder dispute awards damages. CNBC brought me on for an interview. The anchor, a woman named Jennifer Park, who'd made a career of skewering bad executives, smiled like a shark when I sat down. Mr. Martinez, you're now worth nearly $80 million, and you're running a successful competitor to the company that fired you. Does this feel like vindication? It feels like clarity, I said. For a long time, I questioned whether I'd actually contributed anything meaningful to Sterling, whether I'd been lucky or skilled, valued or tolerated. Now I know the market knows, the law knows. I built something real. They couldn't erase that no matter how hard they tried. Your former father-in-law, Richard Chen, has declined to comment on the ruling, but sources say he's furious. Does that give you satisfaction? I thought about that question carefully. A year ago, the answer would have been yes. Absolutely yes. I'd wanted him to suffer the way he'd made me suffer. Wanted him to feel small and worthless and disposable. But sitting there in a studio being interviewed as a CEO and a vindicated shareholder, I realized something. Richard Chen's feelings didn't matter to me anymore. His fury, his embarrassment, his regret. None of it could touch me. I'd moved beyond needing his validation or enjoying his pain. I hope he learns from it, I said finally. I hope he learns that talent matters more than pedigree. That loyalty should be earned, not demanded. That the people who build your empire deserve to be treated like partners, not servants. If my situation teaches him that, then something good came from something painful. The interview went viral. The clip where I said, I hope he learns from it, was shared millions of times, praised as gracious and devastating in equal measure. People loved it because it wasn't vengeful. It was something harder. It was dignified. 3 days later, I received a letter. Physical letter, expensive stationery delivered by courier. The return address was Richard Chen's personal office. Inside was a single page handwritten. James, I'm writing this against the advice of my lawyers, my family, and my better judgment. But some things need to be said directly, not through intermediaries or press releases. You were right about the Asian expansion, about the automation systems, about the Melbourne deal, about how to treat employees, how to build partnerships, how to run a company with integrity. You were right about everything, and I was too proud to admit it. When I brought you into Sterling, I saw and knew what I wished I'd seen in my son. Talent, drive, vision, the hunger to build something meaningful. I thought if I could shape you, mold you into what I wanted David to be, maybe I could prove to myself that leadership is taught, not inherited. But the more successful you became, the more it exposed David's inadequacies. And instead of dealing with that honestly, I blamed you for being too good. I convinced myself you were the problem. Firing you was the worst business decision I've ever made. But worse than that was her. It was cruel. Linda's comment about you washing cars. She told me about that encounter. Told me she'd put you in your place. I should have been disgusted. Instead, I was satisfied. I told myself you deserved humiliation for daring to be better than my son. I've spent 30 years building Sterling Group. You spent 10 years making it great. The difference between those two things is something I'm only now beginning to understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not expecting reconciliation. I'm simply acknowledging what the court has made official. You were never the weak one. You were never the one who didn't belong. You were the best of us and we were too small to see it. Congratulations on Martinez Global on the ruling on proving everyone wrong. Richard Bum. I read the letter 3 times. Each time I felt something different. First, anger. Too little, too late. Second, sadness. For what could have been if he'd said this a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Third, and finally, acceptance. This was as close to an apology as Richard Sean was capable of giving. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. I showed it to Marcus that evening. He read it, handed it back. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. Keep it. Maybe frame it. Not because I forgive him, but because it's proof. Proof that I was right to believe in myself when no one else did. You going to respond? I thought about it. Thought about writing back saying something gracious or cutting or was. But what was there to say? The letter was his burden to carry, not mine to relieve. No, I said finally. He doesn't need my response. He needs to live with what he did. That's punishment enough. 2 weeks later, Sterling Group's annual shareholder meeting was held at the Waldorf History. I received my invitation, as was my legal right as a registered shareholder, and I debated whether to attend. It would be theatrical, potentially petty, definitely uncomfortable for everyone involved. I went anyway. The ballroom was full of investors, board members, analysts. Richard stood at the podium with David beside him presenting the year's results. The numbers were down. Revenue flat, margins declining, client retention problematic. Richard tried to spin it positively, talked about market challenges and transitional periods, but everyone in that room could read between the lines. Sterling was struggling. When the Q&A portion began, I didn't raise my hand. I just sat there in the third row, visible to everyone. Several people recognized me, whispered to their neighbors. I watched Richard's eyes find me, hold for a moment, then look away. After the formal meeting ended, there was a reception. I was heading for the exit when a voice stopped me. James. I turned. Sarah. She looked different, thinner, tired, her eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. Hi, I said. Can we talk just for a minute? We found a quiet corner. She held a glass of wine. She wasn't drinking. I read about your company, she said. About the ruling, about everything. You did it. You actually did it. I did what I had to do. I'm proud of you. She said it quietly like a confession. I know I don't have the right to say that anymore. I know I lost that right when I chose my family over you, but I am proud and sorry. So incredibly sorry. I know, I said. I got your father's letter. He wrote you? She looked surprised. He didn't tell me. What did it say? That he was wrong about me. About everything. She nodded slowly, tears forming. He was. We all were. James, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I've regretted it every single day. The firing, the divorce, all of it. You were the best thing in my life, and I destroyed it because I was too weak to stand up to my family. Your mother called you the weak one, I said. Not me. She was talking about herself. Sarah laughed through her tears. Maybe, probably. God, we're a mess, aren't we? The Chen family empire built on pride and cruelty and fear. You could leave. I said, you don't have to stay. And do what? I've been Sterling Group my entire life. I don't know how to be anything else. I didn't know how to wash cars. You learn. She smiled sadly. Maybe I'm not as brave as you. You could be if you wanted to. She looked at me for a long moment. Are you happy with your company, your life, all of it? I thought about Martinez Global, about the team I'd built, the clients who trusted me, the future I was creating brick by brick, about the couch I'd slept on and the cars I'd washed in the long climb back from nothing, about Patricia and Helen and Robert Kleinfeld and everyone who'd believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Yes, I said I am. Good. You deserve that. You always did. She started to walk away, then turned back. For what it's worth, I think you were always going to be successful with or without us. We didn't make you, James. We just got to watch for a little while, and we should have been grateful for that. I watched her walk away, disappear into the crowd of sterling shareholders and executives and the machinery of a company that was slowly realizing it had lost its engine. I left the Waldorf and walked through Manhattan in the summer evening. The city alive and indifferent around me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through messages. One from Patricia. Meridian wants to discuss Series B funding. They're thinking 500 million. Updawn call me. One from Marcus Chen at Martinez Global. Australian distributor wants to meet, could be huge. One from Tommy at the car wash. Saw you on CNBC. Still the best employee I ever had. Proud of you, kid. And one from Marcus. My Marcus. My best friend who'd given me his couch when I had nothing. Dinner tonight. My treat. You're buying next time, though. You're rich now, I smiled and typed back, deal, but we're still splitting it. Some things don't change. I walked to the East River, the same place I'd walked to at 4 a.m. 6 months ago when I couldn't sleep. When I was trying to remember who I was, I stood at the railing and watched the water catch the last light of the sun. And I thought about everything that had happened. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd gained, everything I'd learned. You were always the weak one. Linda Chen's words meant to destroy me had become the fuel. Every time I'd wanted to give up, every time I'd thought, maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing without them. I'd heard those words and pushed harder. Turns out the weak ones are the people who need cruelty to feel strong. The weak ones are the people who can't win without cheating. The weak ones are the people who destroy talent because they're threatened by it. I was never the weak one. I pulled out the velvet box I'd carried in my pocket for months, the anniversary gift I'd bought for Sarah. The necklace with our intertwined initials. I'd kept it as a reminder of what I'd lost. But standing there watching the sun set over the city that had broken me and rebuilt me, I realized I didn't need reminders anymore. I opened the box, looked at the necklace one last time, and dropped it into the river. It made the smallest splash, barely a ripple, and then it was gone. Some things you carry, some things you let go, some things you build, some things you leave behind. I turned away from the water and headed home, not to Marcus' couch anymore, but to the apartment I'd finally rented in Brooklyn, the one with the view and the space and the quiet I'd earned, and I felt lighter than I had in years. 10 years ago, Richard Chen had offered me a chance to build something meaningful. He'd promised me family, belonging, a place where my talent mattered. He'd lied. Or maybe he'd just been wrong. But in the wreckage of that lie, I'd found something better. I'd found proof. Not proof that they were wrong, though they were. Proof that I was right about myself, about what I could build. About who I'd always been underneath the titles and the validation and the desperate need to belong. I was James Martinez. I'd built an empire once for someone else. Now I was building one for myself, and this time nobody could take it away. James Martinez went on to grow Martinez Global Logistics into a billion-dollar company within 5 years. Sterling Group's IPO eventually happened, underperforming expectations. Richard Chen retired 2 years later. David stepped down as COO 6 months after that, citing personal reasons. Sarah Chen left the family business and started a nonprofit focused on workers' rights. James never remarried, but he dated occasionally and found contentment in the work itself. Building something fair, something honest, something that proved excellence doesn't require cruelty. The velvet box with the necklace rests somewhere at the bottom of the East River. The story of what happened to James Martinez is still taught in business schools as a case study in resilience, corporate governance, and the difference between building a company and inheriting one. But James doesn't think about legacy much anymore. He's too busy building the future. Story 2. My rich wife, the CEO, slapped me in front of my friends and kids, claiming she's the new man in charge. 5 minutes later, my lawyer arrived as I taught her a painful lesson she'll never forget. You know what they say about hindsight being 20/20? Well, mine's got prescription lenses and a magnifying glass attachment. Because looking back, I should have seen this train wreck coming from 3 zip codes away. But here's the thing about being married to a CEO. You get real good at pretending everything's fine while your world slowly turns into a corporate hellscape disguised as a backyard barbecue. So there I was playing the beautiful house husband on what was supposed to be a chill Saturday afternoon. Just me, some friends, our 2 kids, and enough ribs to feed a small army. Nothing fancy. Paper plates, plastic cups, and that fancy-ass potato salad from Whole Foods that I pretend I made from scratch. The kind of gathering where everyone's supposed to relax, kick back, and remember what it feels like to be human instead of walking LinkedIn profiles. Micah, my 10-year-old, was doing that thing kids do where they chase bubbles like they're hunting unicorns. All serious concentration and flailing arms. The kid's got my stubborn streak, but thankfully his mom's coordination, so he was actually catching some. Rowan, 7 and twice as dramatic as a Broadway musical, was providing color commentary for every bubble that got away. Dad, that one was huge. It was like the size of my head. Did you see it? Did you see it? Yeah, buddy. I saw it. Hard to miss a soap bubble when you're standing 3 feet away. Quinn and Leo were doing their best impression of adults, nursing beers, and talking about fantasy football like it actually mattered. Quinn's one of those guys who thinks knowing every stat from 1987 makes him a sports genius, while Leo just nods along because he's too polite to tell Quinn that nobody cares about his draft picks. They're good guys, though. The kind of friends who show up when you need them and don't ask too many questions when your life starts looking like a reality TV show. I was in my element, honestly. Spatula in hand, apron that said Grill Sergeant. A Father's Day gift from Micah that I wore unironically. Just a regular dad doing regular dad things. The ribs were hitting that perfect sweet spot between charred and tender. The kind that makes you forget you ever considered being vegetarian. I was mentally calculating whether I'd made enough when I heard the click-clack of designer heels on our brick pathway. Enter Sloane Mercer. And yeah, she kept her maiden name because God forbid anyone confuse her with some nobody's wife. She strutted into our backyard like she was walking into a board meeting, wearing this crisp white pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Phone glued to her ear naturally because heaven knows the fate of the business world hung in the balance of whatever call she was taking. Behind her, like some kind of corporate entourage, came 2 of her VP buddies, Jessica and Mark. I think hard to tell them apart since they both have that same dead behind the eyes look that comes from selling your soul to quarterly earnings reports. The kids lit up when they saw her. Mommy, look at the bubbles. Rowan practically launched himself at her legs, which would have been adorable if she hadn't held up one perfectly manicured finger in the universal not now gesture while continuing her phone conversation. Micah, being older and wiser to the ways of corporate mom, just waved and went back to his bubble hunting. Smart kid. Quinn and Leo did that awkward thing guys do when the wife shows up late to her own family gathering, suddenly finding their beer labels incredibly fascinating while trying to pretend they weren't just talking about how she's never around. The VP brigade immediately flanked her like Secret Service agents, creating this little corporate bubble in the middle of what was supposed to be a family cookout. I watched her for about 5 minutes, still talking on that damn phone, gesturing with her free hand like she was conducting an orchestra of spreadsheets. The ribs were getting overcooked. The kids were starting to get that deflated look they get when mom chooses work over them for the 1000th time. And I could feel that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The one that said I was about to become the bad guy for asking my own wife to act like she wanted to be here. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I walked over, smiled politely at the VP twins, and said, "Hey, babe. Think you could put the phone away for like 5 minutes? The kids would love to show you their bubble technique." Simple request, right? The kind of thing that shouldn't require a board resolution or a cost-benefit analysis. She looked at me like I just asked her to donate a kidney. That little smirk spread across her face. The one I'd grown to hate. The one that said I was being unreasonable for expecting basic human decency from my own wife. She held up that finger again, mouthed 1 second, which in Sloane speak means anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 hours, and turned her back to me. But here's where things got interesting. I didn't walk away. I stood there, spatula in hand, wearing my ridiculous apron, and waited. Quinn noticed. Leo noticed. Even the corporate zombies noticed. The kids definitely noticed. And after another full minute of listening to her discuss synergistic market penetration strategies or whatever NBA word salad was on today's menu, I did something that apparently crossed some invisible line in the sand. I gently, and I mean gently, placed my hand on her shoulder and said, "Sloane, 5 minutes, please." That's when she ended her call, handed the phone to Jessica or Mark, and turned to face me with a smile that could have frozen hell over. She stepped close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with that particular scent of barely contained rage that I'd become intimately familiar with over the past year. "You want my attention," she said, voice sweet as artificial sweetener. "You've got it." And then she slapped me. Not a playful tap, not a "oh, you silly man" kind of thing. A full-on open-handed slap that echoed across our backyard like a gunshot. The kind that makes your ears ring and your vision blur for a second. The kind that says, "I own you," in a language older than words. The silence that followed was deafening. Quinn's beer froze halfway to his lips. Leo looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth. The VP brigade suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was watching my kids' faces. Micah's bubble wand dropped to the ground, forgotten. Rowan's mouth fell open like he'd just watched his entire understanding of how the world works crumble into dust. And Sloane, she stood there in her pristine white suit, looking around at our shocked audience like she'd just given a particularly effective PowerPoint presentation. Then she delivered the kicker, the line that I'll probably be hearing in therapy for the next decade. "I'm the new man in charge here." Her voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear, cold enough to frost windows, and delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that would make a mob boss take notes. She said it like she was announcing a corporate restructuring, like she'd just demoted me from husband to unpaid intern in my own life. I felt the heat rising in my chest, that familiar cocktail of humiliation, rage, and the kind of helpless frustration that comes from being publicly emasculated by someone who's supposed to love you. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to do something, say something, anything to reclaim whatever dignity was left scattered across our brick patio like broken glass. But instead, I swallowed that fire. I took a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, standing there in her power suit with her power pose, surrounded by her power friends, having just demonstrated her power over me in front of our children and our friends. And I said the only thing that felt true in that moment, noted. That's it. One word, not "how dare you" or "what the hell is wrong with you" or any of the 100 other responses that were ricocheting around my skull like pinballs. Just noted like I was a secretary taking minutes at the board meeting of my own destruction. I turned around calmly, deliberately, and walked toward our sliding glass door. Behind me, I could hear Sloane starting to laugh, probably thinking she'd just won whatever twisted game we'd been playing for the past year. The VP brigade was already pulling out their phones, no doubt documenting this little power display for the group chat later. Our friends stood there like deer in headlights, probably wondering if they should call someone or just pretend they'd never witnessed whatever fresh hell had just unfolded in suburbia. But here's what none of them knew. What Sloane especially didn't know. As I walked through that sliding door, as I stepped into the cool air conditioning of our kitchen, as I moved away from the wreckage of what was supposed to be a nice family gathering, I pulled out my phone not to call my mom or cry to my therapist or post some passive-aggressive Facebook status about disrespect. I opened my text messages. I found the conversation thread I'd labeled simply AC for Ariel, and I typed one word, just one word that I'd been waiting months to send. The word that would set in motion everything I'd been quietly carefully planning while my wife transformed our marriage into her personal episode of Succession. Now I hit send. The response came back immediately like she'd been sitting there waiting for it. 5 minutes. Stay calm. Don't engage. And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. The slap wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of the beginning. All those nights I'd spent wondering if I was crazy, if I was being too sensitive, if maybe I was just not built for being married to a high-powered CEO. All those times I'd made excuses for her behavior, rationalized her cruelty, convinced myself that love meant taking whatever she dished out with a smile and a "yes, dear." All of that ended with one perfectly timed slap in front of our children. Because here's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your title, your bank account, or how many people call you boss. They don't care if you're used to getting your way, or if you think the rules don't apply to you. Consequences are the great equalizer, the universal truth that even CEOs can't restructure or leverage by their way out of. As I stood in our kitchen listening to the muffled sounds of our guests trying to pretend they hadn't just watched my marriage implode in real time, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, not sadness, not even relief. I felt ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to stop being the supporting character in my own life. Ready to show my kids that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is stand up to someone you love when they've forgotten how to love you back. The timer on my phone buzzed. 5 minutes exactly. Time for the real party to start. You ever notice how the universe has this twisted sense of timing? Like how your phone always dies right when you need GPS the most, or how you always run into your ex when you're looking like you just crawled out of a dumpster. Well, apparently the cosmos also has a thing for dramatic irony, because exactly 5 minutes after I sent that text, and I mean exactly like some cosmic stopwatch was keeping score, our doorbell rang. I was still standing in the kitchen staring at my phone and wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or the smartest move I'd ever pulled. The sounds from the backyard had shifted from uncomfortable silence to that forced kind of chatter people do when they're desperately trying to pretend they didn't just witness someone's dignity get curb stomped in real time. Sloane was already back to queen bee mode. Probably spinning the whole thing like it was just a little marital miscommunication. Nothing to see here, folks. But then that doorbell rang and I swear to God it sounded like the opening notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You know that that means fate is knocking and you better answer because it's not going away. I opened the front door and there she was, Ariella Cho, looking like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller where the smart lawyer always wins. 5'0" of pure concentrated competence, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my car but somehow made her look approachable instead of intimidating. She had this way of carrying herself that said, "I could destroy you in court, but I'd rather we kept things civilized." Behind her stood two other people who were very clearly not here for the barbecue. "Jordan," she said, nodding like we just bumped into each other at Starbucks instead of executing what was probably the most elaborate revenge plot since the Count of Monte Cristo. "Ready?" And that's when it hit me. This woman had been planning for this exact moment for months. While I'd been agonizing over whether I was overreacting, whether I should just suck it up and deal with Sloane's increasingly toxic behavior, Ariella had been building a legal fortress. She told me to document everything, save everything, keep records of everything. I thought she was being paranoid. Turns out she was being a goddamn prophet. "This is Marcus," she said, gesturing to a thin guy in a rumpled suit who looked like he'd rather be doing literally anything else. "He's our process server. And these are Janet and Carlos, licensed security contractors." The two security people looked like they moonlighted as yoga instructors, calm, centered, and probably capable of subduing a grizzly bear, using only positive affirmation and strategic pressure points. Marcus was clutching a manila envelope like it contained the secrets of the universe, which in a way it kind of did. Janet and Carlos just stood there being professionally invisible the way good security does, present enough to matter, subtle enough that you don't feel like you're under siege. Ariella walked past me into the kitchen like she owned the place, which, considering what was about to happen, she sort of did. She set down this perfectly organized stack of folders on our kitchen island, the same island where Sloane usually dumped her work papers and takeout containers like she was marking territory. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Emergency protection order," she said, tapping the first folder like she was reading a grocery list. "Board adopted conduct clause enforcement." Tap on the second folder in a notarized letter from a majority block of Mercer Dynamics investors. Tap on the third. Her voice was soft, conversational, like she was explaining how to make pancakes instead of describing the complete nuclear annihilation of my wife's current existence. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Sloane holding court on our deck, gesturing with her hands while the VP brigade nodded along like bobbleheads. She was probably explaining how she'd just established boundaries or demonstrated leadership or whatever corporate speak she used to justify treating people like garbage. The woman could spin straw into gold if it helped her quarterly numbers. "You sure about this?" I asked Ariella. Because even though I'd been the one to set this whole thing in motion, watching it actually happen felt surreal. Like ordering a pizza and then being surprised when someone shows up with food. She looked at me with those sharp, dark eyes that had probably terrified opposing counsel in courtrooms from here to San Francisco. "Jordan, she assaulted you in front of your children and multiple witnesses. She did it loudly, deliberately, and with obvious intent to humiliate. The question isn't whether I'm sure. The question is why you waited this long." Fair point. Brutally fair point. "Besides," she added, pulling out her own phone and checking something. "The board meeting concluded about 3 minutes ago. The votes have been cast, the decisions have been made, and the corporate machinery is already in motion. At this point, we're not creating consequences. We're just delivering them." That's when I realized the true genius of Ariella Cho. While I've been thinking this was about getting revenge on Sloane, she'd been thinking about it like a chess master planning 12 moves ahead. This wasn't emotional. It was surgical, clean, precise, and probably completely legal in 17 different ways. She nodded to Marcus, who suddenly looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the continental United States. "Showtime," she said, and I swear she almost smiled. Almost. I watched through the glass door as our little parade made its way to the backyard. Ariella led the way, looking like she was heading to a casual business meeting. Marcus followed, clutching his envelope like it might explode. Janet and Carlos brought up the rear, maintaining that perfect balance of "we're professionals and please don't make this weird." The reaction from the peanut gallery was immediate and beautiful. Quinn's beer stopped halfway to his mouth again. The man was developing a real talent for freeze-frame drinking. Leo actually took a step backward, which was probably smart since he had good instincts about when was about to hit the fan. The VP twins looked like they just realized they were extras in someone else's drama instead of the main characters in their own corporate success story. But Sloane kept right on talking, waving her hand dismissively at what she probably assumed was some kind of delivery or maybe a noise complaint from the neighbors, because in Sloane's world, interruptions were for little people, and little people could wait until she was damn good and ready to acknowledge their existence. Marcus cleared his throat twice before Sloane finally turned around. And when she did, when she saw this official-looking guy with his official-looking envelope standing next to my lawyer and two people who were very obviously not here for the potato salad, her expression shifted from mild annoyance to something approaching concern. "Sloane Mercer," Marcus said, and his voice cracked just a little. Poor guy probably wasn't used to serving papers to people who could buy and sell him before lunch. Yes, Sloane's voice had that edge it got when she sensed a threat to her control. The same tone she probably used with subordinates who dared to question her decisions. "You've been served," Marcus said, and thrust that envelope at her like it was radioactive. "Emergency protection order and corporate conduct violation notice." The look on Sloane's face was priceless. Absolutely priceless. It was like watching someone realize they've been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish trying to breathe air. The perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that all the color had drained from her face. Jessica or Mark tried to step forward, probably thinking they could somehow executive assistant their way out of the situation. But Janet and Carlos moved with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested they'd done this dance before. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. Professionally, unavoidably present. "What is this?" Sloane demanded, her voice getting that shrill quality it took on when reality refused to bend to her will. She was looking at the papers like they were written in ancient Sanskrit, which, considering they were legal documents, they might as well have been. Ariella stepped forward and I watched from the kitchen window as she delivered what was probably the most polite verbal assassination I'd ever witnessed. Her voice stayed level, professional, almost kind, the way you'd explain to a child why they couldn't have ice cream for dinner. I couldn't hear every word from inside. But I caught enough to know that Ariella was laying out the facts like she was reading a weather report. The assault, the witnesses, the children present, the corporate conduct clause that Sloane herself had signed off on as part of her CEO contract, the board meeting that had just concluded, the immediate suspension of operational authority pending review. Sloane's phone started buzzing, then Jessica's phone started buzzing, then Mark's, then all three of them were staring at their screens with the kind of horror usually reserved for natural disasters or stock market crashes. And that's when I realized that Ariella hadn't just planned this moment. She'd choreographed it. The timing, the witnesses, the corporate board meeting happening while Sloane was busy playing power games at a family barbecue. It was like watching a master class in strategic thinking, except instead of business school case studies, the subject was my marriage. From my spot in the kitchen, watching through the glass like I was observing some nature documentary about the mating habits of corporate executives, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not satisfaction exactly, not revenge. Something cleaner than that. Something that felt suspiciously like justice. Because here's the thing about people like Sloane. They're so used to being the biggest fish in the pond that they forget sharks exist. They get comfortable with their power, careless with their cruelty, confident that their victims will just keep taking it because that's what victims do. But sometimes, just sometimes, the victim has been planning their own comeback. Sometimes they've been documenting every slight, every humiliation, every moment of casual cruelty. Sometimes they've been building their own army, finding their own allies, preparing for the day when enough becomes enough. And sometimes that day arrives exactly 5 minutes after you slap your husband in front of your children. My phone buzzed. Text from Ariella. Phase 1 complete. Stay inside. Let us handle the rest. I looked out at the chaos unfolding on my deck. Sloane arguing with the process server. The VPs frantically making phone calls. Quinn and Leo looking like they'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. And I felt something that might have been peace. The revolution had begun. And it was 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Here's something they don't teach you in marriage counseling. The most devastating weapon isn't screaming, crying, or throwing dishes. It's paperwork. Cold, calculated, legally binding paperwork that turns your entire life upside down while maintaining the polite fiction that everyone's just following proper procedures. From my kitchen window, I had front row seats to what I was already thinking of as the Sloane Show cancellation edition. And let me tell you, watching a master manipulator realize she's been out-manipulated is better than any Netflix series you've ever binged. The woman who'd spent the last year treating our family like her personal corporate subsidiary was about to get a crash course in hostile takeovers. Ariella had positioned herself center stage on our deck, like she was delivering the keynote address at the conference of well-deserved comeuppances. She held one of those folders, the thick official-looking kind that meant business, and started reading from it like she was announcing the weather forecast, except instead of partly cloudy with a chance of rain. It was mostly screwed with a high probability of consequences. Ms. Mercer, Ariella began, her voice carrying that perfect blend of professional courtesy and barely contained satisfaction that only really good lawyers can pull off. Due to the documented assault that occurred 17 minutes ago in front of multiple witnesses, including 2 minor children, Judge Patricia Navarro has granted an emergency protection order effective immediately. Sloane's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic, and finally settling on that particular brand of rage that comes when someone who's used to controlling everything realizes they're not holding the steering wheel anymore. "This is ridiculous," Sloane snapped, waving her hands like she could somehow swat away legal documents. "This is a private family matter. You can't just we can," Ariella interrupted. And I loved how she didn't even look up from her papers. Assault in front of children ceases to be a private matter the moment it occurs. The temporary no harassment order establishes immediate boundaries for all interactions between you and your husband. Additionally, it sets an emergency co-parenting schedule pending a full hearing, which has been set for next Friday at 9 a.m. I watched Sloane's brain trying to process this information, and it was like watching a computer blue screen in real time. She kept opening and closing her mouth, probably cycling through her usual arsenal of intimidation tactics and finding them suddenly spectacularly useless. "Co-parenting schedule," she finally managed to sputter. "That's correct," Ariella said, flipping to another page. "Supervised visits only for the first week, then structured overnight visits pending completion of court-mandated anger management and parenting classes. All transitions to occur through a neutral third party." The VP Brigade, who I was now thinking of as Tweedle incompetent and Tweedle useless, started edging toward the gate like they could somehow escape this corporate nightmare by pretending they were never here. But Ariella wasn't done with her presentation. And honestly, I was starting to think she'd missed her calling as a Broadway performer. "Now," she continued, opening the second folder with the flair of a magician revealing the final trick regarding your professional obligations. "As you're aware, Ms. Mercer, your CEO contract with Mercer Dynamics includes a comprehensive code of conduct clause, specifically Section 4.7, which addresses public behavior that could negatively impact brand reputation." And that's when I saw it. The exact moment Sloane realized she wasn't just dealing with a marital dispute anymore. This was bigger than our marriage, bigger than our family drama, bigger than whatever power trip she'd been on for the past year. This was about to hit her where it really hurt her precious company. The board conducted an emergency session via video conference approximately 12 minutes ago. Ariella continued, consulting her notes like she was reading a grocery list instead of delivering a professional death sentence. Present were 7 of 9 board members, constituting a legal quorum. The vote was unanimous. Unanimous. I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. Sloane had spent so much time alienating people, treating them like disposable resources instead of human beings, that when push came to shove, nobody was willing to stand up for her. Not even her own board of directors. Due to the documented assault, witnessed public misconduct, and potential brand liability, your operational authority as CEO is suspended for 14 days pending a full review by the Ethics Committee and Corporate Counsel. Ariella announced, Chief Financial Officer Riley Park will serve as interim signatory for all corporate decisions effective immediately. Sloane's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it started buzzing continuously like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. Jessica and Mark's phones joined the symphony of corporate chaos, and I watched all 3 of them stare at their screens with the kind of horror usually reserved for alien invasion movies. "Access revoked," Sloane read from her phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Security alert account frozen, pending review." She looked up at Ariella with an expression that could have powered a small city with pure fury. "You can't do this." "We didn't do anything," Ariella replied. And I swear there was just the tiniest hint of satisfaction in her voice. "The board did this. Your behavior did this. The corporate policies you signed off on did this. We're simply executing pre-existing protocols that were put in place to protect the company from exactly this kind of situation." And that's when the full scope of Ariella's planning became clear. This wasn't just about protecting me or the kids, though that was obviously part of it. This was about using Sloane's own corporate machinery against her. The same policies she'd used to control other people, the same rules she'd bent to her advantage, the same power structures she'd climbed to get where she was, all of it was now being used to clip her wings. "The company credit cards have been temporarily suspended," Ariella continued, consulting another paper. "Corporate vehicle access has been revoked. The executive travel account has been frozen. And yes, before you ask, that includes the company jet, the VIP concierge service, and the executive assistant pool." Sloane looked like someone had just told her that gravity had been cancelled, and she was expected to figure out flying on her own. Her mouth was opening and closing like she was trying to speak, but no sound was coming out. It was the first time in probably 5 years that I'd seen my wife genuinely speechless. "This is temporary," Ariella emphasized. And I appreciated that she was at least pretending to be reasonable. The suspension can be lifted after the ethics review, assuming completion of required courses in compliance with behavioral standards going forward. Required courses. Sloane's voice cracked on the words anger management, executive leadership ethics, and family dynamics counseling. Ariella listed off standard corporate rehabilitation protocol for conduct violations. Nothing personal, just policy. The beauty of it was that it really was just policy. Sloane had signed off on these exact procedures herself, probably never imagining they'd be applied to her. She'd helped create the very system that was now systematically dismantling her life. Brick by perfectly legal brick. Riley Park, Sloane's own CFO and supposedly loyal lieutenant, chose that exact moment to call. Sloane's phone rang with that special ringtone she'd assigned to important business calls, and she answered it like a drowning person grabbing a life preserver. "Riley," her voice was desperate, hopeful. "Riley, thank God. Tell me you can fix this." I couldn't hear Riley's side of the conversation, but I could read Sloane's face like a roadmap to despair. With every word Riley spoke, Sloane seemed to shrink a little more. Her shoulders sagged. Her confident posture crumbled. The woman who'd slapped me 15 minutes ago was transforming into someone I almost felt sorry for. Almost. "What do you mean the insurers are involved?" Sloane was practically whispering now. "What do you mean Argent Bio wants a meeting?" "Riley, I've been their primary contact for 3 years." And there it was. The moment Sloane realized this wasn't just about her marriage or even just about her job. This was about her entire professional reputation, her network, her carefully constructed identity as the unstoppable CEO who could handle anything. All of it was crashing down because she couldn't handle a simple request to put her phone away at a family gathering. The irony was beautiful in its completeness. The woman who'd built her career on consequence management and accountability structures was experiencing both firsthand, courtesy of the very system she'd helped design. Janet and Carlos, meanwhile, had positioned themselves near the gate with the kind of casual precision that suggested they'd done this before. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present enough to remind everyone that this wasn't a negotiation. This was a delivery of predetermined consequences. And everyone could either accept that gracefully or learn what security contractors actually meant. Sloane finally hung up the phone and looked around our backyard like she was seeing it for the first time. The VP brigade was already retreating toward the gate, mumbling something about urgent calls and prior commitments. Our friends Quinn and Leo were performing their own strategic withdrawal, probably planning to discuss this bombshell over beers for the next 6 months. "This is insane," Sloane said. But her voice had lost that commanding edge. She sounded tired, confused, maybe even a little scared. "This is my house. These are my children. You can't just actually," Ariella said, closing her folders with the satisfaction of someone who just completed a perfect presentation. "We can, and we have. The lesson, Ms. Mercer, is already in progress." And with that, she nodded to me through the glass door, signaled to her team, and began what I was already thinking of as the most educational 15 minutes of Sloane's entire adult life. The painful lesson had officially begun. You want to know what's really messed up about toxic relationships? It's not the big blow-up moments. Those are actually easier to deal with because at least they're obvious. It's all the little cuts, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, the slow erosion of your dignity that happens so gradually you don't even notice you're bleeding until someone points out you're standing in a puddle of your own self-respect. Ariella opened that fourth folder, the one I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. And I knew Sloane was about to discover just how much attention I'd been paying to those little cuts. See, while she'd been busy building her corporate empire and treating our family like a poorly managed subsidiary, I'd been doing something she never expected from the simple house husband. I'd been taking notes. "Now we come to the documentation phase," Ariella announced, pulling out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Mr. Jordan has been quite thorough in his recording over the past 18 months. The look on Sloane's face was priceless. She glanced from Ariella to me, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out when her harmless, non-confrontational husband had transformed into someone capable of strategic planning. The answer, of course, was right around the time she'd started treating me like an incompetent employee instead of her partner. "These aren't allegations of infidelity," Ariella clarified, which was probably smart since half the neighborhood was now peeking over fences trying to figure out why our barbecue had turned into an episode of Judge Judy. Though there have been rumors circulating in certain professional circles, Sloane flinched. Apparently, those rumors had made it back to her, which meant they were probably more than rumors. But Ariella was right. This wasn't about who Sloan might or might not be screwing in conference rooms after hours. This was about something much more damning in the eyes of the law. Financial neglect and emotional abuse with a paper trail longer than a CVS receipt. What we have here, Ariella continued. Flipping through pages with the casual efficiency of someone who'd organized every piece of evidence like she was curating a museum exhibit, as a comprehensive pattern of family financial neglect and emotional misconduct documented over 8 months. 8 months. That's how long I'd been playing detective in my own life, keeping track of every broken promise, every missed dinner, every time Sloan chose work over our kids, and then made it sound like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic human decency from my own wife. The first batch of evidence was the easy stuff, the quantifiable neglect that even a corporate board could understand. 47 family commitments missed without notice, Ariella read off. 63 instances of arriving more than 2 hours late to pre-planned family activities. 89 occasions where family time was interrupted by non-emergency business calls lasting more than 15 minutes. I'd kept a spreadsheet. Yeah, I know how that sounds, like I'm some obsessive weirdo who turned marriage into a data analytics project. But when your wife gaslight you daily about how you're being too sensitive or unrealistic in your expectations, sometimes you need cold, hard numbers to prove you're not losing your mind. Jesus, Jordan, Quinn muttered from somewhere near the gate. You kept track of all that, wouldn't you? I called back. If someone was constantly telling you that you were imagining things, wouldn't you want proof that you weren't crazy? But the real kicker was the HR documentation. See, Sloan had made one crucial mistake in her campaign of domestic terrorism. She'd brought it to work. Ariella pulled out a separate stack of papers that made Sloan's face go from pale to green. We also have formal complaints filed with Mercer Dynamics Human Resources regarding Ms. Mercer's conduct at company-sponsored events where family members were present, Ariella announced, including 3 separate incidents where she publicly berated her husband in front of employees and clients. Oh, yeah. Those. The company Christmas party where she dressed me down for interrupting important conversations when I'd asked if she wanted to dance with our kids. The client dinner where she'd made fun of my job in front of the Argent Bio executives, calling me her little house husband, like I was some kind of adorable pet project. The charity gala where she'd actually told me to know my place when I'd suggested we should head home because Rowan had school the next day. At the time, I'd swallowed the humiliation and told myself it was just Sloan being Sloan, stressed, overworked, taking it out on the nearest target, but her employees had been watching, her clients had been watching, and apparently some of them had been documenting. Additionally, Ariella continued, we have witnessed statements from neighbors regarding domestic disturbances. Mrs. Lou from next door had apparently been keeping her own little record of Sloan's greatest hits. The time she'd screamed at me in the driveway about forgetting to move her car loud enough that Mrs. Lou's dinner guests had asked if they should call someone. The Saturday morning when she'd called me pathetically useless because I'd bought the wrong kind of coffee pods. Her voice carrying across 3 backyards like a air raid siren. Mr. Okafor from across the street had contributed his own testimony about the evening Sloan had literally thrown my car keys at my head because I'd been 5 minutes late picking her up from the office. He'd been walking his dog and seen the whole thing, including the part where she'd made me get out and pick up the keys while she sat in the passenger seat checking her phone. But the real evidence, Ariella said, pulling out what looked like a tablet, comes from your own security system. And that's when Sloan's face went from green to that special shade of white usually reserved for people who've just seen their own ghost. Our doorbell camera, the one she'd insisted we install for security purposes and then promptly forgotten about because, let's face it, Sloan never thought the rules applied to her. Ariella queued up video after video, months of what she politely called smaller humiliations, but which I'd been living as daily reminders that my own wife thought I was beneath her. Sloan rolling her eyes when I tried to talk to her about the kids. Sloan cursing under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Sloan whispering threats about what would happen if I embarrassed her professionally by asking for basic respect at home. Now, to be clear, Ariella said, pausing the videos, none of this rises to the level of physical abuse, but it does establish a pattern of emotional misconduct and deliberate undermining of parental authority in front of the children. Emotional misconduct. I like that phrase. It made all those moments when Sloan had made me feel like garbage sound official, legitimate, worth addressing. For months, I'd been gaslit into thinking I was being too sensitive when I asked to be treated like an equal partner instead of an inconvenient employee in my own life. The children have reported to their school counselor unprompted that mommy is always angry at daddy and that daddy looks sad when mommy comes home. Ariella read from another document. This was documented in their files following routine check-ins, not in response to any specific incident. That hit me harder than I'd expected. Hearing that my kids had noticed, had been worried about me, had been carrying the weight of our dysfunction to school, That hurt worse than any slap Sloane could have delivered. Because the whole time I'd been telling myself I was protecting them by not fighting back, by not making waves, by just taking whatever Sloane dished out with a smile and a yes, dear. They'd been watching their father get slowly ground down into nothing. Sloane tried to interrupt, tried to spin it, tried to do that thing she always did where she made herself the victim of other people's misunderstandings and oversensitivity. But Ariella just held up one hand, a gesture I'd seen her use in depositions to shut down opposing counsel, and kept reading. The pattern shows escalation over time, culminating in today's physical assault in front of multiple witnesses, including both minor children. She said, "This is not about punishment, Miss Mercer. This is about establishing boundaries that should have been in place months ago." I watched Sloane's mind racing, probably trying to figure out some angle, some way to regain control of the narrative. She was used to being the smartest person in the room, the one with all the information, the one calling the shots. Finding out that her quiet, unassuming husband had been building a legal case against her while she wasn't looking. That had to be like discovering your goldfish had been planning a jailbreak. "You planned this?" Sloane accused, pointing at me through the sliding glass door like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. "You set me up." "No," Ariella corrected, her voice as calm as a meditation app. "You set yourself up. Mr. Jordan simply documented your choices. Every single incident in these files represents a decision you made about how to treat your family. We didn't create this evidence. We just organized it." The VP twins were now actively backing toward the gate, making those important phone call gestures that people make when they want to escape a situation without looking like they're fleeing a sinking ship. Smart move. Honestly, when your boss is getting served with legal papers at a family barbecue, it's probably time to update your LinkedIn profile and start networking. The lesson here, Ariella said, closing the folders with the finality of a judge's gavel, isn't destruction, it's boundaries. Real enforceable boundaries that protect everyone involved, including you, Ms. Mercer. She gathered her papers, nodded to the security team, and headed toward the gate. But before she left, she turned back to Sloane one more time. "The review process begins Monday morning. I'd suggest you use this weekend to reflect on how you got here because the board is going to want answers. And Ms. Mercer," she paused, looking directly at my wife with something that might have been pity. "Next time someone asks you to put your phone away for 5 minutes, you might want to consider just putting the phone away." As they walked away, leaving Sloane standing alone on our deck, surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be her unquestioned authority, I finally stepped outside. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as the convenient house husband she could push around whenever she felt like flexing, but as someone who just reminded her that actions have consequences. "Why?" she asked, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely confused instead of just angry. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, standing there in her expensive suit, surrounded by the ruins of her own making, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Because I said simply, love without boundaries isn't love. It's just slow motion suicide. And with that, I walked back inside to check on our kids, leaving Sloane alone with the mess she'd made and the painful lesson she was just beginning to understand. Here's the thing about being a parent during a crisis. You can't just fall apart and sort yourself out later like you're some childless 20-some having an existential breakdown in a studio apartment. When you've got two little humans watching your every move, trying to figure out if their world is still safe or if everything they thought they knew about family just got flushed down the toilet. You better get your act together fast. So, while Sloane was outside having what I can only describe as a very expensive, nervous breakdown, I did what any decent father would do. I went into damage control mode for the only people in this whole mess who actually mattered. "Hey guys," I called the Micah and Rowan who were standing by the sliding door looking like they'd just witnessed their parents' marriage get hit by a meteor, which let's be honest, they basically had. "How about we head inside for some juice and a chat?" Micah, being 10 and therefore old enough to recognize when adults are using their everything's fine voices while everything is clearly not fine, gave me that look kids give you when they know you're about to feed them a line of BS but they're willing to play along because they love you. Rowan, bless his 7-year-old heart, was still stuck in processing mode. His little brain trying to make sense of why mommy had hit daddy and why strangers with official papers had shown up like they were delivering the world's worst pizza. We settled around our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten probably 1,000 meals together, where the kids had done homework and built Lego castles and had those rambling conversations that kids have about whether dinosaurs would like ice cream. Now, it was going to be the setting for the most important conversation I'd ever had with my children, and I was absolutely terrified of screwing it up. "So," I said, pouring apple juice into their favorite cups. Micah's had dinosaurs on it. Rowan was covered in stars. "That was pretty intense out there, huh?" Understatement of the century, but you've got to start somewhere. Micah, who'd inherited his mother's direct communication style, but, thankfully not her cruel streak, cut right to the chase. "Why did Mom hit you, Dad? Jesus. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that his mother has turned into someone you barely recognize? That the woman who used to read him bedtime stories and kiss his scraped knees had somehow transformed into a corporate robot who thought violence was an acceptable response to minor inconvenience?" "Sometimes," I said, choosing my words like I was defusing a bomb. "Grown-ups make really bad choices when they're feeling angry or stressed. What Mom did was wrong. Hitting is never okay, even when you're upset about something." Rowan piped up, his voice small and confused. "But you always tell us that hitting means time out. Out of the mouths of babes, right?" My 7-year-old had just summed up the entire situation with the kind of crystal clarity that most adults spend years in therapy trying to achieve. If hitting means time out for kids, then hitting definitely means time out for grown-ups, especially grown-ups who should know better. "You're absolutely right, buddy," I told him. "And that's exactly what's happening. Mom is going to have a grown-up timeout so she can think about her choices and learn how to make better ones." Micah, who'd been stirring his juice with the intensity of a mad scientist, looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that were way too wise for a 10-year-old. "Is that why those people came with papers? Like when the principal calls parents to the office? Smart kid, too smart for his own good, honestly." "Something like that," I said. "When grown-ups break important rules, especially rules about being kind to their family, other grown-ups have to step in and help fix things." I could see both kids processing this information, trying to fit it into their understanding of how the world was supposed to work. For them, family had always been this safe, stable thing. Even when Sloane was working crazy hours or being cranky, she was still Mom. Still the person who was supposed to love and protect them unconditionally. The idea that Mom could be the source of danger instead of safety was probably like discovering that gravity worked backwards on Tuesdays. My phone buzzed with a text from Miss Santos, the school counselor I'd reached out to earlier in the week when I'd started realizing this day was inevitable. Thank God for people like her, the unsung heroes who deal with the fallout when families implode and kids get caught in the crossfire. "Quick check-in scheduled for Monday," her text read. "Art therapy session Tuesday. I've already briefed their teachers about the situation. We've got them covered." I showed the kids the text because transparency was going to be the new family policy around here. "Miss Santos wants to meet with you guys next week just to check in and make sure you're doing okay with all these changes." "Are we in trouble?" Rowan asked, and the worry in his voice nearly broke my heart. "No, sweetie," I said, reaching over to ruffle his hair. "You guys aren't in trouble at all. Miss Santos just wants to make sure you have someone to talk to about your feelings because this is probably pretty confusing and maybe a little scary." Micah nodded thoughtfully. "Like when Tommy's parents got divorced and he got to see the special counselor who had all the cool art supplies. Exactly like that." I confirm sometimes when families go through big changes, kids need extra support to help them understand what's happening and how they're feeling about it. What I didn't tell them. What I couldn't tell them because they were too young to understand the full scope of what their mother had become was that I'd been planning this conversation for weeks. I'd researched child psychologists, read books about helping kids cope with family trauma, even practice different ways to explain divorce and separation in age-appropriate language. Because unlike their mother, I'd seen this train wreck coming from miles away and had actually bothered to prepare for the impact. The sliding door opened and Zeke walked in like he owned the place, carrying a stack of takeout containers loaded with leftover food. My best friend since college, the guy who'd been my best man and was now apparently my cleanup crew. He didn't say anything about the legal circus that had just concluded on our deck. Just started loading containers into the fridge like this was a perfectly normal Saturday afternoon. "Uncle Zeke." Rowan launched himself at Zeke's legs, which was probably the first normal kid reaction I'd seen since this whole nightmare began. "Hey there, Space Cadet," Zeke said, scooping Rowan up like he weighed nothing. "Heard you guys are having some big changes around here." I caught Zeke's eye over Rowan's head and mouth. "Thank you." He just shrugged like it was no big deal. Like showing up to help clean up the wreckage of your best friend's marriage was just standard weekend activities. "Are you going to help Dad take care of us?" Micah asked, and there was something in his voice. Not quite fear, but definitely uncertainty about what their new normal was going to look like. "I'm going to help however your dad needs me to," Zeke said simply. "But your dad's been taking pretty good care of you guys all by himself for a while now, hasn't he?" Both kids nodded, and I felt this weird surge of pride mixed with sadness. They had noticed. They'd been aware that I was the one showing up, the one being present, the one making sure homework got done and lunches got packed and bedtime stories got read. They'd known, even if they couldn't articulate it, that their family had been running on one parent for months. Through the window, I could see the security contractors maintaining their professional distance near the gate while Sloane sat at our patio table, staring at the stack of papers like they might spontaneously combust if she glared hard enough. The VP twins had vanished, probably already on conference calls with their own lawyers, trying to figure out how much of this corporate drama was going to splash back on them. So, what happens now? Micah asked, cutting through my distracted observation with the kind of direct question that reminded me why kids make the best journalists. Now, I said, sitting back down and looking at both of my boys, these two amazing little humans who deserve so much better than having a front row seat to their parents' relationship detonating like a faulty firework. We figure out our new normal. We make some new rules about how we want our family to work. We talk to Miss Santos and Dr. Wolf about our feelings. And we remember that no matter what happens between Mom and me, we both love you guys more than anything in the universe. Even when Mom gets mad? Rowan asked. Even when Mom gets mad? I confirmed. Adults can make bad choices and still love their kids. Sometimes loving someone means helping them learn how to make better choices. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Miss Santos. Emergency counseling session available tonight. If needed. I can be there in 30 minutes. I looked at my kids, really looked at them, trying to gauge how they were handling this emotional earthquake. Micah seemed thoughtful, but not devastated. Rowan was already getting distracted by the leftover bubbles on the deck. Resilient little dudes, both of them, stronger than I'd given them credit for. I think we're okay for tonight, I texted back. But, thank you for being ready. Through the window, I watched one of the security contractors approach Sloane with what looked like professional courtesy mixed with gentle firmness. Time for her to leave, apparently. Time for our house to stop being a corporate battleground and start being a home again. Daddy, Rowan said, tugging on my sleeve. Can we have pancakes for dinner? And you know what? That sounded like the perfect way to start our new life. Pancakes for dinner? Because sometimes when your world gets turned upside down, you need to eat dessert first just to remember that you're still allowed to make choices that bring joy instead of stress. Absolutely. I said pancakes, it is because that's what good fathers do. They make pancakes when the world falls apart. They answer hard questions with honest words. And they remember that protecting your kids sometimes means standing up to the person who's supposed to be helping you protect them. The lesson was just beginning, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally learning the right things. You know what's beautiful about corporate karma? It doesn't need a fancy conference room or a mahogany table to serve up a steaming hot plate of consequences. Sometimes it happens right there in your driveway while you're wearing a wrinkled white suit and contemplating the smoking ruins of your professional reputation. Riley Park, Sloane's supposedly loyal CFO and the woman who'd spent the last 3 years kissing my wife's ass like it was her full-time job, chose that exact moment to call. And here's where it gets really good. Ariella hadn't left yet. She was standing right there, probably savoring this moment like a fine wine when Sloane's phone started playing that obnoxious classical music ringtone she used for important business calls. Riley, Sloane answered. And I could hear the desperation in her voice, even through the sliding glass door. Riley, thank God. Please tell me you can fix this nightmare. But here's the thing about corporate loyalty. It's a lot like a fair weather friendship. It looks real solid when everything's going great. But the second storm clouds roll in, suddenly everyone remembers they have other places to be. I watched Sloane's face cycle through about 15 different emotions as Riley delivered what was obviously bad news. Wrapped in corporate speak. The kind of conversation where phrases like brand risk assessment and stakeholder concerns really mean you're screwed and we're all pretending it's about business instead of you being a terrible human being. The branding committee flagged this as a potential liability. I could hear Riley saying, her voice tiny through the phone speaker. She sounded wounded but determined, like someone who just discovered her boss was a liability instead of an asset. The insurers are requiring a full review before they'll continue coverage. And Jordan, Argent Bio, specifically requested a meeting about leadership tone and company values. Argent Bio, Sloane's biggest client, the company that basically funded half of Mercer Dynamics' quarterly profits. The same executives who'd been at that charity dinner where Sloane had publicly humiliated me, calling me her little house husband, like I was some kind of trophy wife who'd forgotten his place. They can't do this, Sloane was saying. But her voice had lost that commanding edge she usually wielded like a weapon. It's a private family matter. It has nothing to do with the company. Wrong again, sweetheart. When you make a career out of preaching, personal accountability, and leadership integrity while treating your own family like garbage, people tend to notice the hypocrisy. Ariella stepped closer to the phone conversation with the kind of professional courtesy that probably terrified opposing counsel in depositions. Miss Mercer, may I remind you that the assault occurred in front of company employees? Your VPs Jessica Martinez and Mark Thompson were present and witnessed the entire incident. All right. The corporate cheerleaders who'd been so eager to bask in Sloane's reflected glory were now probably updating their resumes and practicing there. I was just following orders speeches for HR interviews. Riley's voice came through the speaker again, and this time she sounded less like a loyal lieutenant and more like someone reading an obituary. The board voted unanimously, Sloane. Unanimous. Do you understand what that means? It means you burned every bridge, alienated every ally, and turned your own board of directors into a firing squad. But please don't let me interrupt this educational moment. This is temporary, Sloane kept repeating, like saying it enough times would make it true. This is just a misunderstanding. Once I explain what? Riley interrupted. And wow, I'd never heard her use that tone with Sloane before. Explain why you physically assaulted your husband at a family gathering. Explain why our biggest client is questioning whether we share their values. Explain why our insurance company is treating this like a liability review. The VP brigade, who'd been hovering near the gate like vultures waiting for roadkill, suddenly decided they had urgent business elsewhere. Jessica was already speed dialing what was probably her personal lawyer, while Mark had that deer in headlights look of someone who'd just realized he'd been standing too close to a sinking ship. This is business, Riley continued, her voice getting stronger with every word. This isn't personal. It's not vindictive. It's just business. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the company from leadership that creates liability. Leadership that creates liability. I love that phrase. It was corporate speak for your wife is a walking lawsuit waiting to happen. Janet and Carlos, the security contractors who'd been maintaining their professional distance, moved with the kind of subtle efficiency that suggested this conversation was about to reach its natural conclusion. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present, ready to help anyone who needed assistance finding their way to the exit. You need to leave now, Ariella said, her voice still maintaining that perfect balance of professional courtesy and absolute finality. The protection order is in effect, and continuing to remain on the property would constitute violation of a court order. Sloane looked around our backyard like she was seeing it for the first time. The deck where our kids had taken their first steps. The garden where we'd planted tomatoes every spring. The fire pit where we'd roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories back when we were still a family instead of a corporate case study in domestic dysfunction. This is my house, she said, but her voice was hollow now. The fight was going out of her like air from a punctured tire. Actually, Ariella corrected gently. According to the emergency order, this is a protected residence. You're welcome to collect personal items with supervision, but only after filing the appropriate request with the court. The appropriate request. God, I loved how everything was suddenly subject to proper procedures and official channels. The same woman who'd spent years bulldozing through other people's boundaries was now discovering what it felt like to have boundaries enforced on her. Riley's voice came through the phone one more time. Sloane, I need you to understand something. This isn't about destroying you or the company. This is about protecting both. The board still believes in your potential as a leader, but leadership means taking responsibility for your actions. All of your actions. And with that, she hung up. Riley Park, who'd been Sloane's usewoman for 3 years, had just delivered the professional equivalent of, maybe you should take some time to think about what you've done. The silence that followed was beautiful in its completeness. No more phones buzzing. No more corporate doublespeak. No more pretending that what had just happened was anything other than a powerful woman discovering that power without accountability is just another word for tyranny. Janet approached Sloane with the kind of professional compassion that suggested she'd done this before, helped other powerful people understand that their power had limits, their actions had consequences, and their time was up. M. Mercer, she said softly, we'd like to escort you to your vehicle now. There's no rush, no pressure, just a gentle transition off the property in compliance with the court order. Sloane looked back at our house one more time. At the kitchen window where I was visible with our kids, at the deck where she'd just blown up her entire life, at the garden where we'd once been happy. And for just a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married instead of the corporate monster she'd become. Then she straightened her shoulders, fixed her hair, and walked toward the gate like she was heading to just another business meeting. The lesson was in progress, and class was officially in session. You know what's weird about reclaiming your space after someone toxic leaves? It's not dramatic like in the movies where you burn their clothes and change all the locks while some empowering anthem plays in the background. It's quiet, almost mundane, like rearranging furniture to let light into corners that have been dark for way too long. That night, after the legal circus had packed up and left town, after the kids had processed their feelings over pancakes and bedtime stories, after the last of our shell-shocked guests had awkwardly shuffled home with leftover ribs and traumatic memories, I found myself standing in our living room at 11 p.m. staring at furniture like it had personally offended me. The couch was positioned so that whoever sat in Sloane's usual spot could see both the TV and the kitchen, maintaining perfect sight lines for her favorite hobby of multitasking during family time. The coffee table was angled just right for her to prop her laptop while she participated in movie nights by answering emails. Even the kids' toy corner had been gradually pushed into the least convenient spot because their Lego castles cluttered the aesthetic of her perfect suburban showcase. Screw that. Screw all of that. I started moving furniture like I was performing an exorcism. The couch got rotated 90 degrees facing the windows instead of the kitchen, creating this cozy little family circle instead of Sloane's command and control viewing station. The coffee table got pushed back, opening up floor space for the kids to actually play instead of having to tiptoe around Mom's mobile office setup. Micah wandered downstairs in his dinosaur pajamas, probably drawn by the sound of furniture scraping across hardwood floors. "What are you doing, Dad?" "Making some changes," I said, wrestling with the armchair that Sloane had claimed as her throne. "What do you think?" "Better." He looked around with that serious consideration kids bring to important questions, like where to put furniture ranked right up there with whether aliens exist and why vegetables are mandatory. Then he disappeared upstairs and came back carrying his favorite dragon toy. This ridiculous stuffed thing with purple wings and a lopsided grin that he'd had since he was 3. Without a word, he marched over to the bookshelf and placed the dragon on the middle shelf right at eye level like he was planting a flag on conquered territory. "There," he announced with satisfaction. "Now it looks like our house." Our house. Not Mom's showcase. Not the Mercer Family Museum. Just our house where kids could put dragon toys on bookshelves and nobody would call it clutter. Rowan appeared next, clutching a piece of construction paper covered in crayon stars. He'd been working on it during dinner, tongue poking out in concentration while he colored. Now he was standing on the couch, carefully taping his masterpiece to the wall above where we'd repositioned everything. "Safe spot," he whispered, smoothing down the tape. "Now it's a safe spot." Jesus 7 years old and he already understood what I'd been trying to figure out for months. That home is supposed to be where you feel safe, not where you walk on eggshells waiting for the next explosion. I pulled out my phone and started making lists because apparently I'd inherited Sloane's organizational obsession, but was planning to use it for good instead of evil. New family rules. I typed dinner together every night. Devices down during family time. 3 gratitudes before bed. Simple stuff. Basic human decency disguised as house rules. Revolutionary concepts like actually paying attention to your kids and treating family time like it mattered. Dr. Ellen Wolfe, family therapist extraordinaire, got an email from me at 11:47 p.m. requesting sessions for all 3 of us. I'd researched her for weeks. She specialized in helping families rebuild after trauma, had great reviews from other divorced dads, and most importantly, she didn't take insurance from Sloane's company. The last thing I needed was my wife somehow getting access to our therapy notes through corporate healthcare benefits. Before I went to bed, I wrote myself a note and stuck it on the bathroom mirror where I'd see it every morning. No rage, only structure. Because the temptation to let anger drive this whole process was real. It would have been so easy to turn this into a revenge fantasy, to enjoy watching Sloane suffer, to let bitterness poison whatever came next. But that wasn't the lesson I wanted to teach my kids. The lesson wasn't that powerful people deserve to be destroyed when they fall. It was that everyone, even powerful people, especially powerful people, needed boundaries. Consequences weren't about punishment. They were about teaching someone that their actions affect other people and those other people matter. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I looked back at our rearranged living room. It looked different, brighter, somehow more open, more like a place where a family actually lived instead of where they performed for each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more lawyers, more difficult conversations. But tonight, in a house where dragon toys claimed shelf space and crayon stars marked safe spots, we'd taken the first step towards something that felt suspiciously like peace. The revolution was just getting started. There's something deeply surreal about sitting in a courtroom watching your marriage get dissected like a high school biology class frog. Except instead of finding organs and stuff, everyone's poking around looking for evidence of emotional abuse and finding plenty of it. Meticulously documented and legally admissible, Judge Patricia Navarro looked like someone who'd seen every flavor of human dysfunction and had stopped being surprised by any of it around her 3rd year on the bench. She had that particular brand of patient authority that said, "I've heard all the excuses, seen all the sob stories, and I'm here to cut through and figure out what's actually best for the kids involved." Ariella had warned me that family court was basically theater where everyone pretends to be reasonable while fighting over the most unreasonable situation imaginable. She wasn't wrong. Sloane's attorney, some expensive suit named Bradley, who who looked like he'd rather be negotiating corporate mergers than explaining why his client thought domestic violence was an acceptable conflict resolution strategy, kept trying to paint me as some kind of calculating mastermind who'd orchestrated this whole thing. Your Honor, Bradley said in that pompous voice that lawyers probably practice in law school. My client contends that Mr. Jordan has been systematically planning this alleged incident for months, deliberately provoking. Objection, Ariella interrupted smoothly. Is counsel seriously suggesting that asking one's spouse to put down their phone at a family gathering constitutes provocation worthy of physical assault? Judge Navarro didn't even look up from the video statements she was reviewing. Sustained. Mr. Bradley, unless you're planning to argue that common courtesy is grounds for battery, I suggest you find a different angle. The video statements were Ariella's masterstroke. Instead of dragging our neighbors into court to testify about our family drama, she'd had them record their accounts from the comfort of their own homes. Mrs. Lau, sitting in her perfectly organized kitchen, calmly describing the various times she'd heard Sloan screaming at me like I was a disobedient employee. Mr. Broke for walking his dog while explaining how he'd witnessed the car key incident and had seriously considered calling the police. But the real kicker was the footage from our own security camera. There's something particularly damning about watching yourself on video, especially when that video shows you behaving like a complete psychopath while your husband tries to maintain his dignity and your kids watch their mother lose her damn mind. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple. No dramatic speeches, no emotional manipulation, just the truth delivered as plainly as possible. Your Honor, I want peace for our kids. I want them to feel safe in their own home. I want them to see what healthy relationships look like instead of watching their parents tear each other apart. Sloan's lawyer tried to argue that the corporate consequences were excessive, that mixing family court with employment issues was somehow unfair. But here's the beautiful thing about consequences. They don't care about your feelings or your sense of fairness. They care about cause and effect, action and reaction, the basic laws of social physics that even CEOs can't negotiate their way around. Judge Navarro granted most of our requested parenting plan, structured visits for Sloan, completion of anger management courses, family therapy for everyone involved. Not because I'd asked for revenge, but because protecting kids from witnessing domestic violence was apparently considered a reasonable judicial priority. As we walked out of the courthouse, Sloan looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in that way, people shrink when they realize their usual tricks aren't working anymore. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. No victory dance, no celebration, no gloating, just this long, deep breath that filled my lungs with something that felt suspiciously like hope. Here's something nobody warns you about when your spouse's public meltdown becomes the talk of the town. The rumors move faster than wildfire through a dry forest. Except instead of destroying everything, they somehow make your life better. Go figure. Within 48 hours, every corporate executive within a 50-mile radius knew some version of what had happened at our barbecue. But here's the weird part. Instead of the story being crazy house husband destroys successful CEO wife, it became accountability finally catches up with executive who forgot basic human decency. Apparently, Sloan had made enemies I didn't even know about. The official version floating around the business community was sanitized corporate speak, leadership transition due to conduct review, temporary operational restructuring, family focus, and professional development. Translation: your CEO lost her damn mind at a backyard barbecue and got served with legal papers in front of witnesses. But instead of investors running for the hills like I'd expected, something miraculous happened. They started writing letters, not angry. What the hell is happening with our investment letters? But supportive accountability is actually attractive in leadership letters. Turns out a lot of people have been waiting for someone to finally call Sloan on her. We appreciate companies that maintain high standards for executive behavior. One major investor wrote to the board, leadership integrity at home reflects leadership capacity in business. Another one was even more direct about damn time someone held her accountable. Meanwhile, I went back to my regular life at North Harbor Studio like nothing had happened. Because honestly, what was I supposed to do? Take out a billboard advertising my newfound status as guy who successfully divorced a CEO? The work still needed to get done. The kids still needed school lunches packed and life still required showing up even when everything felt surreal. Zeke had basically moved into our guest room without asking permission. Showing up every morning with 2 coffees and the kind of steady presence that said, your life just exploded, but I'm not going anywhere. He didn't ask probing questions or offer unsolicited advice. Just sat on our porch, drank coffee, and existed as proof that some people actually know how to be decent human beings without it requiring a court order. You doing okay? He'd ask every morning like clockwork. Yeah, I'd answer. And the crazy part was, I actually meant it. Sloan could rebuild if she wanted to do the work. The board had made that clear. This wasn't permanent destruction, just enforced reflection. She could take her classes, learn to manage her anger, figure out how to be a leader without being a tyrant. Whether she would actually do any of that remained to be seen, but at least now she had the opportunity to become someone worth respecting again. As for me, I kept things simple. School drop-offs where I actually talked to other parents instead of hiding behind Sloane's intimidating reputation. Spaghetti nights where we ate at the table and discussed our days like normal families do. Soccer practice where I cheered for Rowan without checking my phone every 30 seconds to see if Sloane needed something. Normal life. Revolutionary concept apparently. 3 weeks later, Sloane showed up at our front gate like a normal person asking permission instead of a corporate raider demanding tribute. The difference was jarring. She actually knocked and waited instead of barging in like she owned the place. Which technically she still half did, but apparently legal papers have a way of teaching people about basic courtesy. Could I see the boys' Firefly jar? She asked, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. I know it's not my scheduled time, but Rowan mentioned it during our last visit. Progress. Actual measurable progress. 6 months ago, Sloane would have pushed past me and taken whatever she wanted while lecturing me about being unnecessarily difficult. Now, she was asking permission and referencing something our 7-year-old had told her during supervised visitation. I nodded and let her in, keeping it structured like the court order required, but not making it feel like a prison visit. We walked to the kitchen where the kids had set up their latest project, a mason jar full of fireflies they had caught the night before, complete with air holes and a tiny dish of sugar water because Rowan was convinced fireflies got thirsty. She seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, she was still wearing those expensive suits and designer heels, but her presence didn't fill up the entire room anymore. She'd taken that first parenting class, completed the anger management prerequisite, and apparently learned that listening was a skill worth developing. Maybe it would last, maybe it wouldn't. People don't usually change overnight, especially people who've spent years believing their own press releases about being untouchable. But for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw flashes of the woman I'd married instead of the corporate monster she'd become. The painful lesson wasn't my revenge. It never had been. It was Sloane's discovery that titles don't make you the man in charge. Character does. Leadership at work means absolutely nothing if you can't lead yourself at home. If you can't treat the people who love you with basic human decency. As for me, I learned that love without boundaries isn't love. It's just slow motion suicide dressed up as devotion. With both kids finally asleep, I wrote one final line in the notebook I'd started keeping. Power is quiet. A door that locks, a routine that holds, a father who stays. And for the first time since that slap heard round the backyard, I felt like our house belonged to all of us again.